A giant horned being is shown speaking to a human, telling him that a meteor from another world had fallen into the demon realm. That badly injured man listens as the demonic creature declares that this place would be where the man's journey ends. The man looks at the being and keeps listening as it says it would grant him one wish. And the dragon with massive horns found it strange when the human said he wanted to go back home. Standing imposingly, the dragon said that for someone who had risked his life to challenge him, that final wish was pathetic. Looking at the human with his head down, he found it odd that someone would pursue an unattainable wish. The human smiled when he heard the dragon say that the interdimensional object that would take him home was inside him. The man didn't care, said the dragon, who had suffered greatly before finally finding him. It said it had been nearly an entire cursed century in that damned world. Hearing that, the dragon raised its paw to strike and said the human was extremely lucky. Because now, looking at that weak and wounded man, he said he would end all of his suffering with a single blow. There stood the man, radiating light, saying he could finally bring all of that to an end. However, the light became so intense that it blinded the dragon's eyes. Its attack was halted, as it could no longer see anything in front of it. Annoyed, the dragon asked the human what that disturbing light was. As the dragon looked again at the man, it thought to itself that his wounds were healing. The dragon knew that this wasn't just an ordinary healing ability. Looking at that overly confident human, it realized he had activated regeneration. The dragon fixed its gaze on the man and asked if he would remove his own heart, or if the dragon would have to do it. While the dragon was still wondering whether this was just a regular warrior or not, the man simply pierced through its body and ripped out its heart. Then he looked back and told the dragon he had waited far too long. Meanwhile, the dragon could only scream in pain. Without its heart, it collapsed to the ground. That man was not just a warrior, he was a hunter, but also a healer. Now he held a glowing stone in his hand. That was the dimensional object. Someone told him he had strange tastes, having spent so much time just to eat those stones now. But the protagonist didn't care and placed the stone in his mouth, swallowing it. After a while, the energy it released formed a magical circle on the ground. He was satisfied, for he was finally returning home. While doing so, he thought of his disciples and his younger brother. He even thought of planet Earth. And just like that, he suddenly found himself lying on the ground in a forest. He slowly opened one of his eyes and noticed he was under a large tree in the middle of the woods. With that, he spoke to his parasite, calling it a freeloader. The parasite inside him replied shortly after, saying it was busy vomiting inside the protagonist's stomach. As he stood up, he realized that his parasite had also arrived safely at that destination. Looking around, he kept talking to his parasite, when suddenly, he noticed something was wrong with his mana. He panicked, knowing the same thing as last time was happening, and this made the parasite curious. The protagonist explained that the last time he passed through a portal on an interdimensional journey, his mana was reduced. The parasite joked that it was absurd for someone to be left with just 20% of their total mana. And as he walked, the protagonist grew angry, saying it wasn't easy to recover from it last time. It had taken decades. He also told the parasite it wasn't completely useless, and that's when he heard a strange sound. In his direction, a panting woman ran, hoping her companions were okay. She was fleeing from a giant monster, a kind of boar-like creature, and she screamed as she ran. To her misfortune, she tripped on a rock. Immediately after, she fell face first to the ground, losing the little advantage she had. She looked back with tears in her eyes, knowing she'd be easily defeated. She was so terrified that she crouched on the ground, covering her head with her hands, and thus didn't see the protagonist. With a single move, he defeated the monster, and with a friendly expression, asked her if that place was Earth. The woman was still too shaken to fully process what had just happened, but she answered the question. He wanted to know which country they were in and what year it was. She replied that it was the year 2037. Doing the math quickly, he realized he had left for another dimension in 2027, so only 10 years had passed. He also wanted to know who the current president was, and she replied it was Choi Dae-soo. As for Vinicius, he thought it was some kind of bad joke that fate was playing on him. With his face clearly showing how stunned he was, he remembered Choi Dae-soo's features. As she watched him rant about the choice of the current president, the doubt on her face was clear. He also told the girl that the flow of mana in that place felt off and asked if they were inside a portal. That's when she started reporting important information about the tower, how it appeared, and its current state. Then she made it clear that the goal was only to hunt down 2 from the first generation. He asked if it basically meant clearing out the dungeon. The woman said it usually took 8 weeks to clear it, and if the person was skilled, maybe 6 weeks. Hearing that, he sighed and was still thinking about what to do while she noticed something. It was a massive tiger walking strangely toward them, coming up behind the protagonist. She observed closely to see if it was really a troll tiger. The claws and teeth were enormous. The trembling woman warned the man that he'd better run, while he muttered that 3 weeks was too much time. As they were talking, a 3-eyed leopard with a huge tongue drooled hungrily, eager to devour them both. In an act of pure agility, the leopard lunged forward intending to swallow them in one go. With a fast and almost instantaneous motion, the protagonist simply hurled the beast far away. The short-haired, green-eyed woman was startled as parts of the feline's teeth flew past her. He said he thought 5 days was enough to clear the dungeon and that he'd give himself some extra time. Elsewhere, a well-dressed man in glasses was sorting out some problems with the reports. When someone arrived and informed him that someone had exited the tutorial tower, he thought it was routine. So that master just ignored the person until he was told that the one who exited wasn't even listed as having entered. The young blonde secretary was trembling. She didn't know what had happened, but the person wasn't in the report. She also informed him that the man was currently causing a commotion outside. The guild master's eyes nearly popped out when he realized who the man in the photo was. He had to grab the clipboard with the report to see it for himself. When he looked, he recognized that young man immediately. That was Hyun. At that moment, Hyun was outside talking to the girl they had met in the forest. The wide-eyed woman could hardly believe they had actually cleared the dungeon. As soon as he delivered the final blow to the monster, he realized that his strength had definitely recovered by 25%. The moment the system announced that they had completed the tutorial and were now calculating stats and analyzing compatibility, the protagonist heard a voice say that his stats were immeasurable, and he smiled like someone who already knew it. Then a portal opened for the two of them, allowing their return to the tower. The woman could only look at the man from behind, and even that already seemed like too much for her. He was now shining. He had finally reached the place he had longed for all this time. Meanwhile, on the other side of the portal, outside the tower, someone was talking to the protagonist. At the same time, another player nearby noticed that the portal had just opened. Among the 3 people he was observing, the short-haired girl stood out for her beauty. The big man walked over and asked what was going on. That was the second leader of the section. The man with the clipboard looked at the large man and explained that they had just come out of the portal. Strangely enough, when he looked at the protagonist, the big man thought he had a smug look, so he held out his arm to stop the security guards and said he would handle it. He approached the protagonist quite rudely and asked why he wasn't on the list. When he heard the protagonist say there was another entrance, he put his hand on his neck and grimaced. While that man was pointing his finger at the protagonist's forehead, the parasite inside him was grumbling about something. As the big man kept making baseless threats, calling it all a performance, the protagonist just stared at him with various unpleasant expressions. Still, he smiled, even as the man warned that if he kept it up, he'd personally wipe that grin off his face. With that, the protagonist told the large man that he had terrible bad breath. The protagonist also reached for his neck, but it was just to mess with the big guy. Tired of making excuses, he told the man to shut up, saying even just breathing near him caused harm. Meanwhile, the man made a disapproving face as he listened to the protagonist say he could bring it on. That's exactly what he did. He began to lean forward with his arm, fist clenched, while the other hand remained in his pocket. Even in front of an enemy who was clearly preparing an attack, the protagonist stayed calm. He looked at the man and asked if he didn't know how to listen because he wasn't going to give him another chance. Meanwhile, 2 onlookers watched what was happening, one of them being a blonde woman with long hair, and within moments she had her hands on her head, not understanding what had just happened. When the guild leader arrived, the blonde informed him that it all started because of the man who had come out of the dungeon. Turning back, he asked if there was any footage from the cameras, and when reviewing the recordings of the fight, he was able to draw his own conclusions. In the footage, the man vanished from sight in the blink of an eye. Security told his superior that the man simply disappeared. He suspected it must be some kind of ability, but the man confidently stated that he had no abilities, he was just incredibly fast. That man was left disheartened because he had wanted to see his brother, whom he hadn't seen in 10 years. Now all that remained were the recordings of his sudden visit to his brother's workplace. An urgent order came in. They had to find that man and bring him in. The leader issued a search order and, if necessary, mobilize everyone in the guild. The Empire Guild also ordered not to provoke him. That man wanted to know where his brother had been all that time. If it had been a kidnapping, there should have been contact. In that case, what would be the first place he'd go in this situation? That was the thought of the Empire Guild leader, until he put a hand to his mouth and raised his eyebrow as he looked ahead and saw a woman with short hair. He asked her if she was the one in the tutorial tower with that person when they finished. She said yes, but claimed she hadn't done anything, yet still managed to raise a skill to rank A. He looked at the woman and thought that even though the final inspection hadn't been done, they should recruit her. When he made the offer and the young woman heard it, her eyes teared up and she clasped her hands together. Speaking excitedly to the Empire Guild leader, she said it would be a great privilege for her. Another person arrived with harsh words, and the leader turned to see who dared speak like that. It was none other than Hunter Ryu Ji-hwan, a man with short light-colored hair and a very smug demeanor. That well-dressed man was an S-rank hunter and the master of the Diamond Guild. With him was Choi Sungul, an S-rank hunter and leader of the White Lion Guild, a man with short hair and glasses. Wearing a yellow trench coat, he said he thought he'd missed his chance and also took note of all the chaos around. Meanwhile, the white-haired man thought it was absurd for someone to cause such a mess, and the one with glasses thought that whoever it was, they needed to find him as soon as possible. With that, Choi Sung-gul made it clear to everyone that his intention was to recruit that individual. That made the short white-haired man with violet eyes chuckle. He figured this would all turn into a huge problem. While the Empire Guild leader and the protagonist's brother just watched from the corner of his eye, the man with glasses and a light-colored trench coat thought it'd be a good idea to split up and search different places. So the light-haired man, leader of the Diamond Guild, was already on his way out. The Empire Guild leader watched him leave and gritted his teeth. He would never let someone like that get his hands on his brother. Meanwhile, outside, a young man seemed anxious, waiting for his master to return. And when the Diamond Guild leader passed nearby, the young man asked if the talk had gone well. With a sly smile, Ryu Ji-hwan said they'd be searching for someone. Looking at that person, he said the target was Min Si-jin's brother. His interest in him seemed strong. While holding a piece of fried chicken, he was scolded by his parasite. But as soon as the protagonist took a satisfying bite of one of the drumsticks, Fred changed his mind. After eating a lot, they left the restaurant, and the protagonist was once again walking through the streets. When Fred, his parasite, asked where he was going, he replied that it could only be home. He then saw a narrow street lined with several modest houses. His house was among those humble homes, and as soon as he stood in front of the gate, he hesitated for a moment before gathering the courage to reach out and open it. He opened it slowly, stepped inside, and began to remember how things used to be when he arrived. He was greeted by his father, who was always reading newspapers, by his smiling mother, who always waited for him with delicious food if she had any. In his memory, he was just a kid, running toward his father and mother, and as usual, he was always with his brother, hearing their mother tell them both to wash their hands. But now it was simply an old, abandoned house, with empty bottles scattered on the floor, overturned furniture, and cobwebs everywhere. Everywhere he looked, all he could see was neglect and decay, and that made the protagonist sad. Even so, he sat down on a piece of furniture, resting his head and body against the wall. He thought that, as expected, he still couldn't remember the faces of his parents. He knew people said that forgetting was a gift from the gods, but to him, it felt more like a curse. In the 100 years he spent in the demon realm, fighting battle after battle on alien planets with no memories, to keep his humanity, he clung desperately to the memories of those close to him, especially the memory of his younger brother, a cheerful boy with straight hair and glasses. The protagonist also had a few disciples, and he tried to remember those people as well. He thought that even if that was all, it had been enough to keep him going for 100 years. And when he heard Fred say his house was lonely, he figured he only made it through because of that little guy. Then he told his parasite that either way, they had only stopped by to take a quick look. They were already leaving. As he stepped out, almost relieved to have recharged a few memories, he said it was time to look for the others. Still with a smile on his lips, he thought that his brother Sinjin was probably doing fine. But unfortunately, he was interrupted by a jerk who called out to him, and that's when he noticed he was surrounded by several others. One of those jerks was a man with red hair, stylish eyebrows, and accessories on his wrists. When the protagonist heard the man say he'd been looking for him all day, he turned to face him. The man on the rooftop boasted about being from Diamond Guild, thinking that just saying the name should be enough to earn respect. The protagonist, mocking, made it clear he didn't care whether they were from Diamond or any other crap. The red-haired hunter was outraged when he heard the protagonist say that even an orangutan could become a hunter. With that, the redhead began showing off signs of his ability, claiming that the man needed a little lesson. In no time, he was right up close to the protagonist with his wrist accessories glowing. The protagonist still had his hand in his pocket when the red-haired man struck him. Now the hunter from Diamond wanted to know who exactly the orangutan was. The protagonist fell to the ground with his hands still in his pockets, staring upward. People thought he had passed out. But in truth, he was just looking at the enemy's status window, which showed a C-rank skill called Lightning Step. Fred told him it was the first time he had absorbed a skill since they arrived on Earth. While the enemy was annoyed to see the protagonist getting up, he hadn't even realized he'd been hit. The redhead was about to complain more, but he was interrupted because the protagonist's counterattack was too strong. Now that Diamond Guild C-ranker was kissing the ground with his face, the others, seeing their leader doing janitorial work with his face, were left in shock. They weren't even scared by the protagonist's power or speed. They were just frozen. The protagonist stretched his hand toward the redhead and told Fred it was mealtime, calling him Predator. As soon as he said that, a magic circle formed around the fallen redhead, who was now prey. In just a moment, Predator had already extracted the skill successfully. It granted increased speed and movement. The protagonist, speaking to his parasite, said he hoped the skill worked well on Earth too. While all that was happening, one of the enemies clenched his teeth. He didn't like how things were going. He shouted for the others not to stand around and ordered everyone to attack at once. Meanwhile, the protagonist told Fred they were about to test the new skill. The parasite affectionately called the protagonist Snack and Foodie, or some variation of it. Activating his skill, he first used Electric Step and in a flash had already taken care of almost everyone. Now the one being properly taught a lesson was the man who came up with the idea for everyone to attack. While the man charged at full speed toward the protagonist, he simply dodged, then delivered a knee strike to the unsuspecting man's abdomen, and at that moment, he had just gained another skill. This one was Vital Strike, Rank C. The effect activated when the body instantly targeted the opponent's weak points. After observing the dull blade the man was using, he thought that if he were a real swordsman, he wouldn't have such a lousy weapon. Still, he decided to keep the blade and immediately dashed toward the next target at extreme speed. When he already had the sharp object pressed to someone's neck, another person called him brother, making him turn around. And as he turned, he saw someone. He noticed that man had the same features his younger brother had back then. Now that man in a suit was standing there, calling him brother. He called the protagonist by name and even showed joy, accompanied by a few tears. That made the protagonist lower his guard and look closely at the person. Meanwhile, Min seemed to slowly want to approach his brother. After the reunion, the leader of that group introduced the newest recruit to the team. He said that if there were any doubts, they as veterans would certainly treat their new colleague very well. The people already on the team with that man found his behavior quite odd. The leader, seeing a woman whispering to another young man, immediately called her over. The others watching thought that maybe he was a 3-star hunter. Being very attentive in a conference room, the leader asked if the hunter would like a coffee. The protagonist replied that he preferred a grilled sandwich, while the man eagerly showed him the new uniform. With that, a young woman with blue hair and glasses raised her hand to welcome the new member. Without wasting time, the protagonist immediately began looking for information about hunters who had died in the past 20 years. The woman was startled, saying 20 years was a huge amount of data, and that she also needed to report it to the hunters. However, she was scolded. The leader told her to do what was asked, while serving water to his new colleague. Kim Sung-na asked the protagonist if his search was limited to human cases. He replied that any case recognized as a murder would do. He thought it was nearly impossible to eliminate an awakened individual unless it was done by another awakened. Kim Sung-na also wanted to know where she should send any information she found. Without hesitation, he told her to send it to his phone, while the leader was informed of some movement. The person at the door reported that there was a territorial war between gang members involving awakened individuals. The leader assumed the police could handle it, but the man revealed that the group in question was Cerberus. When that name was mentioned, the leader realized the situation was serious. The protagonist wanted to know what Cerberus was. Kim Sung-na explained that they were on a whole different level from other gangs, in addition to committing extremely illicit acts. The protagonist asked Byung-gu to take him along, while checking the info that had already reached his phone. Since it was nearby, the leader ignored the fact that the young man was just a rookie and brought him along. While the protagonist was being told he should at least have minimal training, he was already putting on the team uniform. Meanwhile, at their destination, everything was destroyed. The gang was spreading terror. A man walking near someone lying on the ground looked down and said no one could handle him. He declared himself the Shield of Cerberus. This was Hook, the second in command. At the same time, a red-haired youth with metal claws said he had also contributed. Hook thought his little redhead was so fired up, he might as well take care of things himself. Speaking about himself, he said the boss had a good eye for talent. That's how he got chosen. He declared that from that moment on, the area belonged to Cerberus. A voice shouted that it would destroy everything, followed by a massive explosion. The redhead, shocked by what he saw, wanted to know who was causing all that chaos. All they could see was the symbol on the protagonist's uniform, indicating he belonged to an organization. Now the second in command shouted to the redhead that he shouldn't have messed with the hunters. While yelling at the others, Hook was startled to hear someone speak directly to him. The protagonist said that judging by his ramblings, it must have been him who had taken out the hunters. With that, the protagonist revealed eyes on the verge of madness and told the man to show him. The 4 members thought that man was very brave for crawling in alone to face all of them. However, the second in command found it odd that the man wanted to face them all by himself. Activating his skill, the second in command of Cerberus was about to use his full body armor, ranked B. With that, he launched himself at the protagonist with the intent of doing some damage. After the blow had landed, the man thought he was seeing his grandfather on the other side of the river. He saw that little old man waving at him and really thought it must be his grandfather calling him over. With that image in his mind, he found it strange. Just a moment ago, he was fighting. The truth was, the man was lying on the ground, trembling, deliriously thinking he was talking to his grandfather. Suddenly, the protagonist dragged him by the hair, wanting him to get up because he needed information. He told the man that now he was the only one left. Then he asked his predator to devour that skill. The parasite did so and found it delicious. That trembling man, lying on the floor while losing his ability, couldn't understand why a fake cop was going so far. With an extremely gentle face radiating joy, the protagonist said that worms like them were incapable of understanding. Even so, the trembling man wanted to know why everything was happening. The protagonist explained that he just wanted to assess the skill levels of the awakened criminals. After a while, the leader of the organization arrived, saying he had just finished clearing the club downstairs. Looking at all the destruction, he said he had been worried, but now he realized it was for nothing. With his foot on one of their heads, the protagonist said he had left one alive for interrogation. Looking at the redhead, he said he hadn't been as merciful with the others, and that the leader should clean up the mess. Byung-gu thought they were cruel enough to justify executions. Looking at the protagonist scratching his head, he figured he'd always been known as the Mad Dog. Now the protagonist handed him over just to make sure the leader would actually clean everything up. Meanwhile, one of the survivors was hiding under a piece of furniture, calling the leader of Cerberus. At the same time, that man was reporting that the third in command, Jakin, the leader's brother, had been eliminated. The hunter from Red Light Guild had just arrived and was being received. The one who welcomed him expressed condolences for the loss of his younger brother and said the man should go straight to the association. That man stated that the body of the suspect, Jakin, was currently at the Florence Department for Hunters. Of course, the older brother didn't like hearing his younger brother being referred to as a suspect, so the redhead wanted to know from the agents if the person who eliminated his brother was part of the organization. Not getting the answer he wanted, he asked if he could go beyond his scheduled activities. One of the agents informed him that he could not, and if he insisted, he might be deported. The redhead was visibly upset. He thought they just wanted him to accept his brother's death, say goodbye, and leave quietly. As they passed, the redhead spoke with his right-hand man to take charge. The mission was to find the bastard who had taken his brother's life. That man was a long-haired B-rank hunter. As he walked with his right and left-hand men, he thought about how he would rip that bastard's heart out. Elsewhere, the protagonist asked his brother if all of their friend's belongings had been taken. Min Sejin told him that 2 days before the man was eliminated, the house had been completely looted. Then he handed him something, explaining that a hunter's mana was like a fingerprint. The friend in question, Min Jun, had been an archaeologist and had tons of materials stored at home. Analyzing the situation, the protagonist thought it didn't seem like a killer. It looked more like a thief. He said that if the goal was to erase mana traces, setting the house on fire would have been more effective. Holding the evidence, the protagonist said he had searched the agency's criminal cases, but found too many similar cases. Turning his back to his brother and putting his hands in his pockets, he said maybe he should just go around kicking down some doors. His brother was concerned about how much time had passed, but the protagonist replied that they wouldn't know anything without checking. With a hand on his head, the protagonist felt that despite answering confidently, he didn't think it would be easy. After a while, following the instinct of the predator, he was tracking down all the thieves, but he was annoyed. In that alleyway, the protagonist was irritated. He thought the parasite had led him into a dead end this time. He didn't even hear someone saying something. It was an employee addressing his boss, and the protagonist was observing. To hear better, he crouched closer to eavesdrop on the conversation between those two rats. The subordinate told the boss, a large and burly man, that someone was going around kicking down doors. The employee also said that they just needed to hold out a little longer and those bastards would disappear. The boss replied that hunters made a lot of money by joining guilds, so the agency probably didn't have anyone ranked very high. As the two of them turned their backs and the boss puffed on his cigar, a voice asked where the warehouse was. They turned around and saw it was the protagonist, who wanted to know the location because he was about to conduct a seizure. The employee told the boss that this must be the bastard from the organization who had been kicking down doors. The boss grabbed his phone and called all his thugs to teach the intruder a lesson. Soon after, 3 fighters showed up, ready to follow the boss's orders. A chubby man with a mustache pointed at the protagonist and said to grab the guy who had the audacity to interfere. Now wearing the organization's uniform, the protagonist showed no fear or concern. On the contrary, he seemed pleased that they were all coming at him at once, so the protagonist started chatting with the parasite, saying he used a skill for old time's sake. When the predator asked if he would use a sacrificial skill, he answered yes, and a magic circle formed. The light radiating from the circle was so intense that it impaired the vision of the employee and the boss, who stared at the protagonist. He quickly unleashed a shockwave, and with high speed, struck several of the thugs. In no time, they were all on the ground, twitching from electric currents. The employee was now being pressured by the protagonist, who demanded to know where the warehouse was. The employee, clearly afraid, asked who this guy was and where he had come from. With a wicked smile, the protagonist said he was just a crazy bastard. That was the term they had used to refer to him minutes ago, so the protagonist found it fitting to throw it back at them. He entered the warehouse and noticed there were several rare and valuable items inside. After that, he tied up the criminals while listening to his parasite bragging about its instincts. The predator asked the protagonist if that food supply supplement was what they were looking for. Holding a book with a lock on it, the protagonist said it was exactly what he needed, his friend's research notes. Placing his hand on the lock, they figured it might only open with the original owner's mana. The parasite, calling the protagonist Snack, asked why he wanted to use the book if it wasn't going to open. Completely ignoring his parasite, the protagonist called the leader of the organization. He said he had some criminals tied up and also needed a card be sent because he had multiple places to go. He held the phone a little away from his ear to avoid hearing the leader's endless questions. After that, they went to a neutral combat zone where underground techniques and strange abilities were allowed. That place had all kinds of people and served as a hub for exchanging knowledge of all kinds. The location was called Black Sky, and one of the captains was sitting at a table reading her fortune and that of the place. With her long black nails, she pulled a card and gave a slight smile. She sensed that an interesting guest might be arriving. That was one of the 10 captains of Black Sky, a powerful sorceress. Walking through the area, the protagonist thought not much had changed over the last 10 years. The parasite commented that the people there had some interesting abilities and suggested they defeat one and use their skill. As the protagonist spoke to his parasite, he reminded it that this was a neutral zone, free from combat. The black-haired woman known as the witch was eagerly awaiting the protagonist's arrival. The woman with long black hair looked at the protagonist, barely able to believe that 10 years had passed. Resting her chin on her fist with a smile, she asked why he never sent a message. Showing her the locked notes from his friend that he had found, he said he needed her help. Smiling, the woman said that even after 10 years he hadn't changed. He still got straight to the point. Holding a silver chalice and a sharp object, she asked if he still remembered how it was done. The protagonist knew very well how it worked, so he grabbed the sharp item and was about to cut his hand. After making a small cut, he let the liquid fall into the chalice, knowing the ritual would be impossible without it. With the right person, the spell would be completed, like preparing a pot of curry. He was thinking about these things as he watched the witch drink from the silver goblet. Meanwhile, he watched the witch chant her spell while holding his friend's belonging. He knew that abilities in that category often had a high probability of being tied to crime. The protagonist watched the young woman finish her ritual while using a sharp object. After making the potion for the protagonist, the girl felt so satisfied that her cheeks even turned red. As for the protagonist, while he held the girl's hand, the parasite complained that her ability tasted awful. The girl, still seated, hoped the protagonist would stay a bit longer, but he told her he had things to do. Watching the protagonist leave, the girl thought he had become a very mysterious man. While the protagonist was driving down a street, the parasite said that place was awful and it never wanted to return. The protagonist replied that he was overreacting. It was just a small cut on his arm. After driving around the city for a bit, they finally arrived at the place where his disciple Minjun had been eliminated. The parasite, calling the protagonist Snack, said that now that it had energy, it could go in whenever it wanted. The protagonist admitted he wasn't the only one who had trouble accepting the loss of that dear friend, and when he looked to the side, it felt like he saw them all together again. Those were happy moments they had shared. Placing his hand on the table where they had spent so much time together, he was certain he had to uncover the truth. When the protagonist placed his hand on the floor, his parasite asked if he was really going to use that. After saying yes, he placed both hands on the ground to perform a mana scan. He placed the jar the woman had given him, and after activating that circle on the ground, all the mana began to flow into the jar. As this happened, he started seeing images, like a projector flashing scenes of his friends in front of him. The parasite told the protagonist that since too much human flesh remained, it was hard to see what really happened. The fact that his friend had never been a weak hunter was bothering him. He wouldn't be taken down so easily. He thought that the fact someone had done it so quickly and alone meant the culprit was highly skilled. Looking into those memories, he saw his friend's facial expression, unique and intense. He got as close as he could. It seemed like the man was trying to say his final words. As the protagonist leaned in, he managed to hear mana from his friend say 2 words, and one of them was order. With that, another image began forming through the mana. It was a hooded person. That hooded man had his head bandaged and one unusual eye. With that information, the protagonist concluded that his friend hadn't been just doing research. As the mana entered the jar, he thought that his friend might have been part of an organization. After finishing, the protagonist knelt to pick up the jar that held the mana. He looked at that jar while his thoughts reflected on the things his parasite was saying. The protagonist said it was fine. After 100 years, it was time for something to break. While he was still there, he noticed the door opening. The person who appeared behind him asked if he was Min Sinjin. Then that man placed his hand on his head and asked the protagonist why he had been running around all day. The protagonist stated that the man had taken 6 rats with him, but was acting all high and mighty. When the man noticed that the protagonist wasn't some amateur, he raised one eyebrow. That man thought it was good the protagonist was still in shape. It would make things more interesting. The man's proposal was for the protagonist to come quietly, with hands and feet tied. But neither of the options seemed to please the protagonist, who clenched his fists, ready to fight. The blue-haired man seemed very interested in having a fight with the protagonist. Meanwhile, the protagonist just observed him from afar, or at least it looked that way. In a matter of seconds, that man was struck hard. This was the protagonist and his predator. Tired of waiting, they had gone ahead and created a third option themselves. Seeing that scene, the others quickly rushed to attack the protagonist as well. But someone arrived and prohibited anyone from getting closer to the protagonist. That was the older brother of the third in command of the Cerberus organization, the one the protagonist had eliminated. The protagonist just gave a mocking look to that man after hearing he was there for revenge. The man used an attack. After leaping into the air, red chains appeared around the protagonist's body. That man, with his arm completely taken over by power, asked if the protagonist had been the only one, and if he was truly responsible for eliminating his younger brother, the third in command of Cerberus. As the protagonist placed his hand on his neck, the parasite said that out of all of them, that one looked the most delicious. However, the protagonist went further and asked the stunned man if he usually bothered asking the names of trash. The man was so furious that he cracked the ground beneath his feet while cursing the protagonist, calling him a bastard. Charging at the protagonist, he shouted that he was going to rip out his heart. With that, he launched the attack, his enraged gaze intended to intimidate his opponent. As soon as he touched the red-haired man, the protagonist could tell he was close to reaching rank A. Looking at him, he knew the man had used instant healing, which could only mean he was a healer. Then the two began to exchange a few blows. The subordinates watching the fight couldn't believe that the man had managed to block the attack from the guild master. Obeying the other man, one of them tried to join the fight but ran straight into the protagonist. Using his lightning step skill, the protagonist took him down and stopped him from interfering. Returning to the fight, he thought it had been a long time since things had gotten this interesting. Meanwhile, they noticed that he was a healer with acceleration ability. The red-haired man realized the protagonist had analyzed his movements and was dodging them with minimal effort. While choking one of the subordinates, the redhead said the protagonist was mistaken about something. Still holding the man's neck, he said that if a crime had been committed, no matter who it was, they would pay. As he said that, he stared directly at the redhead and declared that they were awakened criminals. The red-haired man ground his teeth and glared at the protagonist with an unusual hatred in his eyes. Hearing those words, he remembered the little brother he used to carry on his back when they were young. The memory of telling his brother he would always protect him drove the man into a rage. He was now ready to attack. His spears were part of a celestial ability with wolf fangs. Watching the arrows form, the protagonist told his parasite he wouldn't be able to avoid this without using a skill. However, the parasite said he was becoming overloaded and should remember he was only a fragment of mana. Even so, the golden magic circle formed on the ground and the neutralize ability was activated. The enemy recognized that it was the dispel skill but couldn't figure out the protagonist's level. The blue-haired man couldn't believe the protagonist had a skill capable of nullifying attacks. While the redhead glanced at the blue-haired man, the protagonist quickly closed the distance. As he struck, he called him a cockroach and said he couldn't sympathize with a criminal like his brother. Even for someone skilled like the guild master, it was difficult to block such a powerful blow. Though he blocked it, his arm was seriously injured. The redhead assumed that since the protagonist was a healer, his mana would soon run out, so he prepared a heady attack. He attempted to crush the protagonist with a concentrated celestial wolf fang strike, but the protagonist dodged. Faster, the protagonist kneed the redhead in the face and grabbed his hair tightly, then landed a heady punch downward onto his head. He was teaching the redhead a lesson, as he had already told him to stop using that kind of ability. He said the building was already in bad shape, and now he was going to ruin what was left, so the protagonist kept on educating him. They hurled themselves at each other fiercely, but the protagonist clearly had the upper hand. He dodged a few strikes now and then, but most of the time, he was the one attacking. The blue-haired man didn't know what to do. Sometimes the boss told him to use his skills, and other times forbade it. Even so, he decided to follow the last order and tried to bind the protagonist with his reddish chains. And just as the redhead thought the protagonist was securely tied, he flew toward him to attack. However, the protagonist cast another one of his magic circles to protect himself. Soon, the protagonist used a skill on the redhead called Life Steal. It was SSRank. Bit by bit, the redhead started looking skeletal, and his life seemed to drain along with the air. The blue-haired man, watching it happen, didn't know whether to cry or tremble. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming. With his feet back on the ground, the protagonist told them he was never just an ordinary healer. He didn't use mana to heal. Vital Force was about controlling one's own strength. With his radiant gaze still glowing beneath the golden shield, he said it was sorcery of the spirit of life. When he approached the blue-haired man with braids, the guy dodged like a common cockroach. So the protagonist went easy on him, just gave him a few light slaps to the face. But that alone was enough to scare the man so much that he fainted from fear. After everything, the protagonist checked if the camera on his belt was doing its job correctly. He asked Byung-gu if he had seen everything. This time, he hadn't started the fight either. The people who had seen it all live were wide-eyed in shock. A man said he was right, but he didn't manage to press the correct button that time. Now a meeting was taking place. It was a complicated situation for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A man asked how long they had been doing live broadcasts. It was about live streaming the process of apprehending criminals through social media integration. That man wanted to know if a talent had joined the association and why someone so skilled would do that. The issue was that the person who had been eliminated in that live broadcast was a hunter invited from another guild. While the meeting was happening, someone apologized for arriving late. He was Choi Dae-soo, the current president of that state, a middle-aged man with an eye patch. A few days later, at the Empire Guild cafeteria, a place where the guild staff gathered. On that particular day, there were many people in the cafeteria. The protagonist's brother noticed that he was lost in thought while they sat together at a table. Even though the protagonist was stuffing more food into his mouth than usual, his brother insisted on talking to him. While the brother tried to talk about something serious, the protagonist was just fascinated by the snack variety at the cafeteria. As the protagonist ate, his brother expressed concern about the video involving the hunter, but the protagonist was only interested in the plate full of treats and seafood. Min Si-jin's concern was that the current president might find out his brother had returned. But grabbing a bit more food, the brother said it was fine. Nothing was going to happen to him. Then he placed the food he had picked up with his chopsticks into his brother's mouth, telling him to worry less. Frustrated, that man with glasses told his brother he wasn't a kid anymore. He was too old for this. While the two were having lunch, members of the Empire Guild team walked by and recognized the protagonist. From the incident the day he exited the tower, the girl who had cleared the tower with him was also among them. The leader of the Empire Guild knew those people were there because there had been a seminar for new hunters. That's when he introduced a brown-haired man, saying he was from the White Lion Guild. Alongside them was Amato from the Foss South Guild, a man with short blue hair. The man approaching the protagonist said he was Dar, a hunter from the Empire Guild. That large man said he'd heard a lot about the protagonist's progress in the HNCS organization. Chu Haman, placing his arm on the other hunter's shoulder, wanted to know if this was the high-level guy everyone was talking about. Observing the protagonist, that brown-haired man thought it was nonsense to call him that. However, the man from the Empire Guild, along with the girl who first welcomed the protagonist, didn't like the comment. His brother, the leader of the Empire Guild, liked it even less. He thought that man was being rude. That hunter thought the Empire Guild leader was always too uptight. It was just a question after all. While that man stirred up trouble, the woman and the other blue-haired man from the guild simply left. It was clear that the young man from the White Lion team genuinely wanted to pick a fight with the protagonist. So far, he kept eating. He wasn't about to interrupt his meal for a fight. While that man claimed to be a disciple of Sao Long, the protagonist remembered an old photo. Pointing to himself, the man said he was the master's favorite. After finishing his meal, the protagonist crossed his arms and said that his master had failed to teach discipline. That disciple didn't like the rude way the protagonist spoke about his master. Not one bit. The man thought that if they weren't in someone else's guild, he definitely would have done something. He stormed out, kicking chairs, clearly upset with what he'd heard about his master. With a hateful glare, the man looked at the protagonist and warned him to be very careful where he walked at night. Seeing that person acting that way, a hunter from the guild told the master he'd handle it. While the guild master said he would take care of it himself, the protagonist bragged about how he just stayed cool. The protagonist was cheerful. He said that man was the disciple of his own disciple, so he would let him handle it. Meanwhile, a very well-organized office was shown. That's where Choi Shangul, the guild leader, was. Baek Gun-ho, the director of the HNCS organization, was having tea while speaking with a visitor. The man with him was Choi Shangul, the leader of the White Lion Guild. He had come to ask for their cooperation and also to offer an apology. While speaking, that man looked at his own reflection in the teacup. With a smile, the director said that, as a guild leader, the man didn't need to apologize in person. As the conversation progressed, the director suspected that the man might be trying to scout someone. So the director was clear in stating that the protagonist was a highly valuable asset to the organization. The guild leader found it strange when he saw the protagonist was handling the transport of a prisoner. While the 2 teacups remained on the table, the director commented that it was rare, but not unprecedented. As they talked, important documents from the organization were shown sitting on a side table. Standing up, Choi Song-gul said he understood but wanted permission for the one who caused the problem to personally apologize. The director was surprised by the request, but still sipping his tea, said that it was something the two of them should settle between themselves. And as the man was leaving, the director wished him a safe trip back. After leaving the director's office, the White Lion Guild leader had no intention of giving up on someone so talented. Once the man left, he began speaking with the secretary to locate Chu Hammond and prepare for a trip. The secretary wanted to know where she should instruct the hunter to go. Meanwhile, at Incheon prison, a guard stood outside, fanning himself because of the intense heat. As the two guards chatted, they didn't understand why the prisoner was making a scene after being detained for months. One of them placed some papers on the table and said it was frustrating, especially with audit season approaching. Among the papers on the table, one had a photo of the person in question. The officer remembered that the man didn't resist when he was arrested, and he had thought there wouldn't be any trouble. Meanwhile, the prison cell doors were shown. Everything was in perfect order and silence, until prisoner Sherry Volk appeared, exiting with his hands cuffed. Looking down near his foot, he saw a rat and wanted that beast to deliver a message. With a smile, he looked at the tiny rat and said it was already aware of the upcoming meeting, and the organization was already in motion. Then he threw the rat to the floor and stepped on it, wanting it to finish its task. If he wanted out of prison, he had to stir up trouble and rob everyone of their peace. Outside that same prison, the protagonist was slowly approaching. He looked at the complex as he walked, knowing that was where the Awakened One was being held. When Chu Hammond arrived at the prison gate and spoke to the guard, he realized the prisoner had already been taken. He was irritated, thinking the transport shouldn't have been handled so carelessly. When he looked back, he saw a bus speeding away and asked the guard if the prisoner was on it. After the guard confirmed, the hunter quickly jumped into his car. He couldn't afford to fail his mission. While driving, he spoke on the phone with someone, saying he would be out of range for a while. Meanwhile, the bus traveled along dangerous and suspicious roads. Inside the bus, the protagonist calmly sipped his iced coffee. The criminal beside him asked if he knew what he was doing. Being ignored, the prisoner then asked the protagonist if he wasn't afraid of being such an unfriendly person. The protagonist kept ignoring him, but was polite enough to answer that he wasn't the prison director. That led the criminal to assume he must be a high-ranking hunter from a famous guild. This piqued the protagonist's interest, and he asked the man who he was. The man found it odd that someone would be handling prisoner transport without knowing more about him. Still, he thought the protagonist was either brave enough or just too naive. The protagonist looked at the man and didn't care. He just wanted to finish his iced coffee in peace. The man grew agitated and showed his clenched fists, even while in cuffs. He claimed that even with all the restrictive power of those special restraints, they hadn't stopped him from killing 5 cellmates. While he went on talking, the protagonist continued enjoying his delicious iced coffee. He was almost done with it, sipping while listening to that unpleasant man ramble. Then suddenly, it seemed like an explosion went off, knocking the bus off course and causing it to flip over. The vehicle rolled several times before crashing into a patch of green grass. Outside, an old man and a child already seemed to be waiting in what looked like a trap. Kicking the door open, the prisoner made sure he could break through it. Then, sitting at the bus window, he told the old man to destroy just one bus and not try to kill him. The old man told him to stop being so dramatic. He was fine, and that's what mattered. After that, the man ran toward the boy and the old man because they needed to leave quickly. The man said he had left the protagonist unconscious, taking advantage of the impact and stepping on his head. Now that child was preparing to remove the handcuffs from the criminal's wrists. Even with the man restless, the boy managed to successfully unlock the handcuffs. Rolling his shoulders, the man thought he had been stuck for too long and was almost suffocating. But then a voice arrived, saying those prisoners belonged to him and they needed to be retrieved. The person who showed up was an A-rank hunter from the White Lions Guild. Clenching his fists as if ready to fight, that hunter warned that he wouldn't let any of them escape. Meanwhile, the young boy, who was also part of the criminal organization, stood beside the man. All three were getting ready, and the old man told the criminal to prepare quickly to take down that person. That A-rank from the White Lions Guild was already set to begin a fight with the criminal. The criminal had a strange power. He transformed into a werewolf. His ability was Wolf Bear, an A-rank skill. Seeing that, the hunter gritted his teeth. He knew it would be tough, but even so, the criminal was still just human. His eyes turned red, and he began unleashing his fury through his power. His most promising illusion-based attack, called Azura, was an A+ rank ability. Even with the ability activated and his body wrapped in what looked like armor, he could still feel the hits. It was strange to still be feeling blows from that werewolf despite being heavily equipped. Now both were taking damage from one another's attacks. Still, he attacked the werewolf relentlessly, hoping to defeat him quickly. The werewolf blocked and continued launching his own strikes toward him. Then the old man ordered the child to enter the fight and do something. Despite his age, the boy was extremely strong. He released his ability, and snakes shot out from his hands. Chu Hammond saw the boy throw them in his direction, so he dodged. But it was no use, those pink-toned snakes were homing-type abilities. He could dodge and curve as much as he wanted. They would mimic his movements in pursuit. They quickly wrapped around his body, completely immobilizing him. With that, the werewolf landed a direct hit on the hunter and even boasted about what he had done. After landing the blow, the wolf mocked the hunter who dared fight them alone. Lying on the ground, the hunter looked at the wolf and thought it was sheer ignorance to keep bragging. But the wolf didn't care and continued kicking the man even after he was down. Outside, the old man ordered the wolf to finish off the hunter once and for all. Following the old man's orders, the werewolf concentrated his mana in his claws, turning them into a lethal weapon. Lying on the ground, the hunter gritted his teeth and veins bulged on his face. He was preparing for the end. At one point, all three launched themselves at the man, trying to eliminate him once and for all. Even just the remnants of that power were enough to leave the hunter badly injured. However, someone who hadn't been part of the conversation appeared and began controlling the power around them. When the hunter saw the protagonist, he couldn't believe he was still alive. Then the protagonist explained he had taken a while because he wasn't used to the small camera on his belt yet. Hearing that, the wolf and the old man started talking to each other. The werewolf swore he had dealt with him. The hunter shouted at the protagonist not to get involved and to wait for reinforcements. But the protagonist didn't care what he was saying and began talking to the criminals. A strange woman told them that, as criminals, they were to be executed immediately. With the authority of the hunters from the organization, the three of them were classified as criminals. Surrounded by a pink light, the protagonist said that the disciple of Xiao Long should pay attention. The power of Azura wasn't just for attack, and with that, the disciple didn't fully understand what he meant. The werewolf didn't want to waste time and lunged at the protagonist, ready to strike. With his blow and his jaws wide open, he thought he would get a favorable result. Azura could also be a piercing ability. Those were the words of someone who had reached the peak. The hunter from the White Lions was stunned. That man could use his master's technique. Like lightning, he shot upward toward the werewolf. The blow he received was so strong that it forced him to revert to human form. The old man thought he could enter the fight and began to unleash his unique power. Seeing that, the parasite asked if it could feed on that power. The protagonist explained that this kind of power was singular and couldn't be shared. The old man thought the hunter who had fallen to the ground might interfere in the fight. He cast a few magic symbols in his direction and told him to take it easy. Meanwhile, that rank A hunter from the White Lions Guild was still lying on the ground. To the protagonist, it made no difference. He had no intention of defending that hunter. That caused a bit of panic in the old man, who assumed he would use the fallen hunter as a pawn. The old man still tried to convince the protagonist not to get involved any more than he already had. As the man talked, the protagonist, in a show of disrespect, simply finished cleaning his ears. While the caster was being trapped in the magic circle on the ground, the protagonist showed total disinterest. That was bad for the old man, who had planned to use him as a bargaining chip. He widened his eyes when he realized that man didn't care at all. Slowly, the protagonist walked toward the old man without showing the slightest fear, and worse, he wanted to ask questions. The old man thought this person was too nosy and shouldn't go digging up hidden truths. However, the protagonist was determined to do whatever it took to extract the truth from that old man. Even though the old man tried to use a high-level power to defend himself, it would be completely useless against the protagonist. When he saw the old man about to use a very expensive crystal, the protagonist immediately launched an electric attack on him that caused the crystal on the tip of the man's staff to overload. Then it exploded, rendering the staff useless. The parasite inside the protagonist thought the meal had just become 40% more appetizing. Meanwhile, the protagonist looked at the old man and said he wanted to know more about the organization. The old man couldn't say anything. There was a law that if he spoke about the organization, he'd be marked and eliminated. The protagonist listened to the old man speak calmly, with his hands in his pockets. At that moment, the werewolf started showing signs that he could stand up. The old man looked back and told him he was late to react. But by then, the protagonist had already noticed that what the old man feared most was finally dying. That triggered an interesting ability. He created several magic circles under his feet and in his hand. Meanwhile, the old man ordered the werewolf to attack the protagonist. The werewolf was willing to follow the old man's command, even though he believed the man was cursed. But in front of him, the rank A hunter who had previously fallen appeared once more. He wouldn't let the werewolf pass. Now the fight was about to get a bit more interesting. The werewolf laughed in the hunter's face and told him he should have stayed down, though the hunter shared the same thought. Without wasting a single moment, the protagonist began activating his traps. They were visibly psychological traps that lured everything nearby. That ability was known as Thousand Winds, an SSRank skill. With it, he managed to grab the old man's neck. He squeezed hard and told him it was getting close to what it actually felt like to die. The old man's veins bulged all over his face as he screamed in agony. The protagonist had already given him plenty of chances to speak peacefully, but now he had to be more persuasive, so he kept squeezing until the old man started shaking violently and begging. The rank A hunter thought that man was some kind of twisted monster. He made no move to interfere. He only watched the protagonist still gripping the neck of that criminal elder. Crossing his arms, the protagonist warned the old man that this was the third time he'd asked, and this time, he wanted the right answer. With both evildoers inside the circle, the werewolf pleaded for the old man to tell the truth. When he finally spoke, the protagonist smiled. He had reached a certain point. Looking at the young man, the old man realized after analyzing his abilities that this was the mad dog. The protagonist could be terrifying even with his hands in his pockets. His aura was chilling. While crouched, the protagonist prepared to ask the question he had wanted to ask from the very beginning. Using mana to summon a kind of hologram in his hand, he produced the image of someone. That hologram made reference to a mercenary organization called Beast. They were a specialized group made up of hunters who would be gathering soon. That old man who fought was a hunter who had joined that organization. As a first-generation hunter, he spent a long time in the shadows until he finally decided to sign a contract. It was something that would keep him chained to the organization forever, and if he revealed the secret, he'd be eliminated. Now, lying on the ground, that man knew that once the organization discovered that he had betrayed them after 15 years, it would be his end. But the man in front of him was also terrifying with cruel methods. That's why he decided to reveal that the man in the hologram was one of the members of the Beast Association. He was known in the group as Black Snake. After getting the answer he wanted, the protagonist spent a moment thinking about the unusual name of that person. He wasn't satisfied and wanted to ask them a few more questions, and find out if either of them was involved in the elimination order for Hunter Minjun. The protagonist noticed he was struggling as much as he could to avoid answering. The problem was that the protagonist unleashed his killing intent, making both of their skin burn. That old man said that even though it was an organization, everyone was more like independent contractors. He also explained the reason they went to rescue the wolf from prison. With that, he spoke about the meeting that would happen in a few days, where all members of the organization would be present. The old man also said that if the protagonist wanted, the two of them could reveal the location and how to infiltrate. Then he asked to be accepted, along with the boy, as the protagonist's subordinate. Meanwhile, the disciple of the protagonist's friend was furious. He didn't know what they were talking about. He approached the protagonist, calling him brother, and begged him not to consider that request. The protagonist asked since when the two of them were brothers. The man said ever since he used the technique, and now he wanted to be accepted as a disciple too, instead of letting the criminals take that spot. Meanwhile, the protagonist was only interested in information about Black Snake. He knew that if he let those two go, the organization would probably handle them, but they could also betray him. That's why he decided to accept them as his subordinates, which immediately startled the red-haired hunter. The old man thanked him. He knew now he might have someone to protect him from the association. Looking at them, the protagonist said that even if they were forced into it, they were still traitors, and once a traitor, always a traitor. When the two heard they would have to sign a contract using a mana oath, they were stunned, but they accepted, and the magic circle quickly began forming beneath them. The protagonist was highly proficient in mana usage and symbols, so he was able to form the sigil swiftly. Standing on the sigil, the two of them spoke their names and swore loyalty and faithfulness. Meanwhile, the parasite knew that if they belonged to the protagonist, then they belonged to him too. The contract was quickly completed, and now the two were officially bound to the protagonist. He stated that he would protect both of them and deal with any situation that put their lives in danger. Watching everything unfold, the red-haired hunter couldn't understand why the protagonist hadn't chosen him too. But when he tried to get his attention, he noticed in his red eyes that the protagonist wasn't completely pleased. Holding that contract in his hands, the protagonist used mana to make it vanish. Calling the red-haired hunter disciple of Xiao Lam, the protagonist said he would accept him as his disciple. That made the man very pleased, but he was only accepted because the protagonist would need some extra hands. But in no time, the young man was already acting like he was leading the other two disciples. Looking at all that chaos, the protagonist knew he'd have to make a call to get everything cleaned up. Back at the prison, the warden was furious about the prisoner having escaped. Meanwhile, the protagonist remained calm while his supervisor took the full blame in his place. The warden seemed extremely upset because that prisoner had been under the guard of association members. At a certain point, the man got tired of hearing it all and began questioning the warden's loyalty. It was a tough position. He had released a dangerous prisoner with only one guard. Now that man would use the situation to paint the director as an ally of the association. Without warning, it was announced that the prison would undergo an inspection, and many from the association entered to conduct it. The leader of that association counted on the director's cooperation and asked him to stay calm during the inspection. Back with the protagonist, he was being told that he couldn't just make a phone call whenever things went south. Then he reported that, as instructed, he had already completed the cleanup for the escort mission. But he wanted to know what the White Lion's hunter, Chu Hammond, was doing there with him. And worst of all, even an unidentified old man was present, along with a criminal who had just escaped from prison, now labeled as someone dangerous. The protagonist asked Byung-gu to sit down for a moment and explain the entire story behind everything. Now he wanted to explain to everyone how their mission would work. He said that the next day they would infiltrate the hunter organization's meeting. Byung-gu could hardly believe what he was hearing. He didn't know how they could infiltrate without being noticed. With a wide grin, the protagonist said it was too obvious. He also revealed that the real goal of the mission was a complete extermination. In a hidden location, the meeting was starting. What was impressive was the high attendance. Only 2 chairs were empty that day. One of the participants questioned why the Red Ghost and Volks weren't present. The red-haired man with the eye patch expressed his surprise that 2 weaklings had dared to betray them. With the betrayal came the breaking of several promises, which the girl sitting awkwardly in her chair noticed. The man with the scar, seeing everything unfold, asked everyone to be quiet. It was enough. He said the decision on how to deal with the traitors would be made solely by the boss. Meanwhile, the leader said he was enjoying the direction of the conversation and encouraged them to keep discussing it. Looking around at the others, the boss asked if anyone else had something to say. At the meeting, it was clear that the red-haired man with the eye patch was uncomfortable. This was evident from the way he held his hands and positioned his body. However, the leader wanted to decide on the punishment and through that, determine who would handle the traitors. There was a moment of silence, but someone, irritated, asked the boss to stop joking around because he was never funny. The snake-like man said they could deal with the traitors whenever they wanted, but the problem was that someone knew the meeting location. The meeting grew tense, and just as one of the members was about to speak, the intrusion alarm was triggered. Everyone heard the alert. Unknown movements detected at all 5 entrances. This was an unusual situation. No one had ever tried to invade that location before. The real issue was that the exits were also the entrances. They had to split up, each person covering 1 infiltration point. In a commotion, many left their seats. The red-haired member believed it was right that the boss and Hojo didn't participate, but wondered why Black Mamba wouldn't either. Black Mamba himself stated that he didn't like dealing with small fry. Unlike the others, Black Mamba found it interesting that the boss had managed to put a leash on such savage mercenaries. Meanwhile, hiding in the ventilation tunnel, one of the protagonist's allies worried about the insanity they had recently agreed to. Things had escalated minus 30 minutes earlier. The informants had revealed the meeting point. The elder accompanying them had warned that there were 5 entrances, each equipped with detection sensors. He also mentioned that the internal structure changed frequently, so they couldn't know where each path led. Thinking it through, the protagonist realized each of them had to act at a different entrance, so the enemy would have no escape. As planned, Byung-gu had brought radios for communication. They also concluded that since each entrance had sensors, the enemy was already aware of their presence. That's why everyone needed a way to communicate. If things got out of control, they were to contact the protagonist immediately. Everything had to be reported, especially if they located his target, Black Mamba. It was then that the protagonist's newest disciple had an idea. He would enter through the air vent. He hadn't had much success so far. He had found nothing but a dead end. At the current moment, he hadn't fought anyone and had reached the main meeting hall. From above, he noticed that everyone present was obviously rank A or higher, and yet the security was very lax. He knew that even if he used the radio, regrouping would take time, so he had an idea. He thought of reducing their numbers a little, so he tossed a small ball near a chair. Hojo saw a small ball rolling by and assumed it would mysteriously land in his hand. When asked if he still played, the person said yes, especially since they had won a voucher the other day. And just as the Christmas-themed ball was touched, the explosion was imminent. There was hardly any way for people to defend themselves. From a distance, the boss asked if Hojo was still alive, but Black Mamba noticed that a little rat had slipped in quietly. So he decided to return the gift. He threw a grenade in the direction where the ball had come from. He thought it was a good ambush, but he didn't like playing hide-and-seek. That caused the hunter who had been hiding earlier to reveal himself. He came down already trying to fight Black Mamba on equal footing. He was immediately recognized. It was the hunter Kwang Jung-gu. His situation was bad. He only had one more magic suppression grenade left. When he threw the first one, he thought he could at least reduce their numbers. Black Mamba couldn't believe the traitors had sold him out to that guy, the leader of the organization. While watching the Snake Man speak to him, he seemed to get an idea. But Black Mamba said he was impressed. They were risking their lives and abandoning the organization. But it was foolish. They ended up choosing such a meaningless fate. However, Snake Man's idea wasn't well received because his opponent threw another grenade at him. But everyone there found what was happening quite amusing. Watching the scene while sipping tea, the members just thought the fight would be entertaining. Mamba said he remembered that person's ability. He had the habit of launching homing swords, daggers, or other weapons. Of course, nothing worked because Black Mamba's skin was too thick, so he decided to counterattack. One of his attacks threw his opponent at high speed into a wall. After landing such a brutal blow, he asked his boss if he could finish dealing with that person. Realizing the mess he'd gotten into, the man made one last effort and used his radio to report his location. As soon as he did that, Juan took a strong kick to the chest. Even his opponent knew the guy had acted too late. He should have made contact earlier. Now he wanted to know who was next. Was it a traitor like Jacqui, or maybe the branch chief of HMCS? While he was speaking, hurried footsteps echoed. People were running to the scene, including the 3 people he had just mentioned: the Elder, the Wolf, and a hunter. Then he concluded it wasn't just one or a few, it was all of them. And with that, he managed to dodge an attack that he seemed to have sensed coming. Now seeing them come to defend their ally, he thought they had been quick to take down the beast members. Black Mamba saw from afar that the boss looked disappointed. He thought he had chosen strong people. But Snake Man didn't think it made sense. The injuries were signs that there had been a fight, but there was no way such weak people could have won. Becoming extremely irritated, Black Mamba said there was no way they could have taken down Tiger or Grizzly so easily. All of them had some sort of issue with the members of the Beast Group. Besides, he talked too much. That's why he was about to get hit. But that hunter from the White Lion Guild didn't have much success. Chu Hammond was thrown far away after being restrained. He was hurled to the side, near the organization's leader. In a fraction of a second, both the Elder, the Wolf, and the others found themselves in a complicated situation. Judging the coordination, they all thought it was too perfect to be random. It couldn't be just an organization. Black Mamba's question was, who had managed to unite so many people who had never even crossed paths? Wang Junggu wanted to know how they had all arrived so quickly. He said he had been fighting the enemy near the entrance when Suokyung appeared. He said the Elder and the Wolf were probably in similar situations. Now the Wolf needed to find a way to fight an A+ ranked Awakened and capture him alive. The Elder knew that Black Mamba hadn't shown his real skills yet, and the hall was already in ruins, and as an Elder he noticed Mamba wasn't using his full power. He probably had a strategy ready. As for the boss, his ability was completely unknown to the Elder. There was no way to predict what he might become, so he needed to have a plan as well. He threw his staff to the ground and gave the signal. He would handle the boss, and the others should focus on capturing the target. The Wolf was annoyed, as he always ended up with the dirty work. While Chu Hammond prepared to attack Black Mamba from behind, he heard the man muttering. The Elder noticed that the Wolf was already out of the fight after just one blow, but declared that no one would leave. He had to form his binding formation. He thought it was the best strategy. Meanwhile, Chu Hammond prepared to attack Black Mamba alongside the Elder's magic. The Elder's chains were also trying to restrain their master, the leader of the beasts. That Elder warned the leader of the organization that no matter how strong he was, he wouldn't be able to escape. But someone who had stayed out of it so far, just watching the fight, was now being forced to intervene. Meanwhile, Crow, who had been hit at the start, was beginning to get back up, and he was already behind the Elder, determined to end it all. Bora the Wolf and Huang would need to intervene as he thought that person had already died. Black Mamba took advantage of the freezing mage falling unconscious and broke free from his chains. The man was going to deal with those people because he didn't know when reinforcements would arrive. That's why he needed to eliminate all of them as quickly as possible. He would use his A++ rank Draconian ability. By using his Draconian skill, he could transform into a venomous lizard man. From that moment on, everyone in that place had to double their attention toward that lizard. The power of that lizard could be similar to the wolf's, but the mana density was far too high. Meanwhile, the lizard was just waiting. Since his durability was much higher, his only option was to buy time. He looked to the side and noticed things weren't going well on the other front either, so he couldn't wait for backup. He was ridiculously upset. He had never been dead weight in a fight before, and then the worst happened. He was struck by a dagger in the arm. As soon as the dagger touched his arm, he began to feel the effects. His opponent, when throwing the dagger, knew the fight wouldn't be easy. His enemy was also using elemental magic. Even with several people willing to fight the venomous lizard, he was staying ahead of them. In a moment of distraction, Hyung was nearly crushed by a massive rock. But the lizard didn't like seeing someone ruin his plans, so he decided to attack that A rank as well. After neutralizing another opponent, he returned to Hyung, saying surface hunters always made mistakes. He was lecturing him, saying that mana levels and abilities were different things and didn't determine victory. Meanwhile, the fight was against the wolf, who was taking a serious beating. The entire floor of that meeting hall had been equipped with self-destruction formations, just in case of an emergency. It was literally a trap from which no one could leave alive after entering. Meanwhile, the Mamba continued tightening his grip on his victim's neck. However, he felt something very strange that made him immediately pull back. It was a terrifying killing intent. As soon as he felt it, he retreated as far as he could, realizing someone was entering, and now he was the prey. Sneaking in, determined not only to protect his team, but also to seek revenge. The protagonist was after Black Mamba, and as soon as he saw that giant lizard, he charged at him. He could hardly believe he had finally found his target, and now Black Mamba was in terrible hands. He was so consumed by vengeance he could barely control himself and hurled Mamba against the wall. Meanwhile, the wolf's opponent wanted to know who that person interfering with the fight was. The protagonist was so fast he didn't settle for just neutralizing Black Mamba. He also attacked the wolf's opponent. At the same time, the leader of that group realized the man who had just entered managed to perform some sort of reverse engineering. However, the parasite inhabiting the protagonist believed it was all thanks to him, since his vessel was weak. The leader was fascinated. The facility had cost billions, and it was turned to scrap in the blink of an eye. Trying to recover, Black Mamba said that his monstrous entrance had caught him off guard, but he was beginning to understand what was happening, and from that moment on, the opponent wouldn't have another chance. Looking at the protagonist, he knew it was him who had taken out the mercenaries and assembled that team. The protagonist had a different view. He believed that if anyone was responsible, it was only Black Mamba, who was nothing but a bastard. When the head of the organization heard that, he asked Black Mamba what kind of mess he had gotten into. That snake said he never acted on his own instincts. He only followed orders, and now he was the target of revenge. He made it clear that it didn't matter who it was. Whenever he eliminated someone, he made sure not to leave any traces. Suwu claimed it was because of revenge, but that wasn't the only reason. And when he said those words, he already had a completed magic circle in his hand and unleashed that power. Seeing all that, the leader tried to prevent the protagonist from taking a more drastic action. He was interrupted. The elder placed his staff against the man's neck while the wolf held his shoulders. Seeing that nothing could be done, he raised his hands and said that, in any case, he wasn't planning to interfere. The leader of that group, seeing that one of the strongest was struggling to fight a single man, became curious about who that man was that was giving Black Mamba such a hard time. Now that Snake realized he was dealing with someone who had tracking abilities, nothing could be done. He was weaker and would certainly be defeated, but before that, he needed to reveal why he wanted to know. After being thrown against the wall, he reverted to his original form, shedding his poisonous lizard body. Black Mamba took pride in knowing everything about the top-ranking hunters, but he was frustrated because he knew nothing about this one. Even though he was losing, he still had one last card up his sleeve. At least he thought it would work, but when the protagonist jumped above him, he realized things were going badly. After slamming the man's head into the ground, the protagonist kept his foot pressed down, demanding answers. He warned that a single wrong move could make him lose control. He could only speak with permission. After receiving a few strikes to loosen his tongue, the snake begged the protagonist to stop. Suwu was losing patience with the venomous snake, grabbed him by the neck, and demanded to know about the VIPs. He wanted to know who had ordered the elimination of Jung Ninjun. The moment he heard the name, Black Mamba realized who he was talking about. He began mocking the situation, amused that the protagonist had made it this far. He hadn't known he was connected to that man. Suwu gripped the snake's mouth tighter and said that if he truly wanted to see, he should forget the contract. Grabbing Suwu's arm, the snake asked if he really wanted to know, because he didn't think he should tell. Then, when he opened his mouth, he said that even if he wanted to reveal it, it wouldn't matter because the man wouldn't be able to hear. Showing a large mark on his tongue, he explained that the listener's ears would melt first, then he spat venom at him. He claimed that staying silent about clients was the golden rule among mercenaries. But with that action, he left the protagonist no choice. He had spit in his face, and now he was furious. With a touch, the protagonist, being an excellent healer, healed himself, now convinced that Snake wouldn't talk. When Black Mamba realized he was facing a healer, he was horrified. The fear was so great that he pleaded for help from the leader, who simply raised his hands and said he couldn't interfere. Knowing he was on his own, the snake finally decided to talk. He began saying that the client who hired him was with Pandemonium. The moment he started to speak, he was eliminated. The protagonist was still trying to process the information. The leader finally decided to extend his claws. He would now get involved in the fight. Using his true powers, he repelled everyone who had been trying to restrain him. Removing the hood from his head and revealing his black hair, the leader said he finally understood who that person was. He now knew that this was Min Suwu, a first-generation hunter who had disappeared over 10 years ago. Now the protagonist had only one question. He He wanted to know if the leader was part of Pandemonium. However, smiling, he said that his group was just a mercenary guild. They didn't take individual contracts. He said that his sister had once mentioned a first-generation hunter with bizarre healing powers. With a stern expression, the protagonist told him that lying wouldn't help. It was pointless. The man claimed he was telling the truth and that the protagonist had probably already discovered a lot about the leadership. That leader admitted that he had completely forgotten about the existence of an old generation hunter after all that time. Then he snapped his fingers and escaped with his subordinate. From above, he asked the mad dog if he would chase after them. He replied that it wasn't necessary. He had already found what he came for. Feeling relieved, the leader of the beasts simply said he felt better hearing that. Entering a portal with his subordinate, he said they would meet again. His disciple didn't understand why Messi let them escape, but the protagonist warned that if they gave chase, magical cycles would activate, and they were all already in a bad situation, only made worse by an explosion. But now one huge doubt lingered. What did his friend have to do with Pandemonium? In front of a laptop screen, he was watching and searching for something about Pandemonium. He knew that 20 years ago, the first gate opened on Earth, bringing all kinds of things. The source of all power was mana, monsters, magic stones, and rare resources. Demons were a race as proficient in mana manipulation as the Awakened, specialized in unique abilities. Using the first gate, they infiltrated Earth during the chaos, declaring themselves as dimensional supervisors. Their view of humanity was disdainful, bringing mana storms and monster invasions, treating humans as an inferior species. Amid all of this, there was a group of humans who managed to rise, worshipping the Demon King as their leader. That group was called Pandemonium. Fortunately, their tyranny didn't last long, because the first-generation hunters quickly mastered mana manipulation. The war between humanity and demons for the survival of Earth ended with humanity's victory, putting an end to the chaos. It had already been over 10 years since the protagonist defeated the fourth Demon King and was thrown into the dimensional rift. He knew that, by that time, the Pandemoniums had already been dissolved, but that name was now returning. The parasite said that even in his own world, demons used dragons as subordinates. Sivu told his parasite that the memories from before discovering the other world never came back, but he still had a strange feeling. But he had seen with his own eyes the behavior of demons in that other world for over 100 years. Back then, when fighting demons, he was too busy to analyze them, and later spent years fighting their subordinates. He knew the mana patterns of demons were different from humans, but they had become skilled at faking it. The parasite thought there was no need to think. He should just eliminate all demons. While the two were talking, someone walked through the door where the protagonist was conducting his research. He looked at his brother and thought he had come back early. He wanted to know why. But his younger brother found it strange that, out of nowhere, he suddenly wanted a space just for himself. He explained it wasn't anything major. He had just been searching for traces of an old friend. His brother wanted to know if that was an office meant to gather people related to the case and asked who exactly he had brought in. But the brother was very worried. He knew he shouldn't be drawing so much attention. It was dangerous. Yet the protagonist remained calm, saying that Bayangu had already erased all the evidence of his involvement. But everything he heard from his brother sounded like nonsense. He thought the protagonist should act more cautiously. His younger brother's concern was genuine, as he had already said his mana hadn't fully recovered. And even so, he kept getting involved in different dangers. It had already been 10 years, and the world had changed a lot. To lighten the mood, the older brother gave a few playful pats on the younger one to put him at ease. Despite being very worried, the younger brother, leader of a famous guild, wanted his older brother to keep his promises. Then he mentioned Shim Jisu, saying her awakening abilities were more complicated than they had thought. So he asked his older brother for help disciplining that team, and the protagonist agreed. He called his brother to go out for dinner, saying he had a huge hole in his stomach. Hearing the parasite's complaints, the protagonist was certain that was the true source of his insane hunger. He was about to eat again when he got a call. It was Bayangu. Now he had to deal with a protagonist who was furious for being ratted out to his younger brother. That man said it was the first time a mercenary hunter organization had gone public. Because of that, the agency was in chaos. At every moment, the receptionist had to deal with her superiors. Bayangu, who was just an officer in a single department, had to listen to his boss say they were being watched. Now the boss wanted all the paperwork and a full report submitted as quickly as possible. So he had to make several phone calls to fill in the gaps in the report that needed to be delivered. He often called the protagonist for help, as he didn't know how to explain defeating a team of mercenaries. However, the protagonist was always eating and said he would help later, eventually. That made the protagonist start to doubt whether that really was his longtime companion. As soon as he got back, the protagonist's brother wanted to know if the person on the call was Bayangu. The protagonist confirmed and said he was really enjoying the job he had recently gotten. Then he asked his brother what had been going on lately with the demons, if they weren't the same as 10 years ago. He said that after the fourth demon disappeared, The demons had indeed agreed to a peace treaty. Since then, they had been stationed on the polar continent and were planning to create an institution to study Earth's mana. He said it was extremely rare to see a demon outside the polar continent. They didn't appear in public. He added that nowadays, children thought demons were just urban legends. Now the protagonist was focused on that so-called peace treaty they had made. Even his parasite thought it was strange. Demons agreeing to peace was ridiculous. The protagonist knew that even among humans there was a lot of trash, so it wasn't surprising that some worshipped demons. When he remembered the leader of BTS, he noticed that he used mana with the same pattern as the demons, but something about it felt off. Looking at an old photo, he knew that the demons had arrived on Earth about 20 years ago, so a hybrid between them wasn't hard to imagine. He knew all of this had started with a quest for revenge after losing a dear friend. But as he followed the path left behind by that friend, it seemed like he was discovering a lot. He was aware that his friend had traveled a long way through glaciers in search of something greater. He had a feeling that this battle would last much longer than he expected. Worried about his team's poor performance in the last mission, the protagonist demanded that they meditate. And under his supervision, everyone was giving their best, although some clearly had no idea what they were doing. One of his disciples didn't agree with staying still meditating. He preferred to be moving. However, the protagonist caught the wolf man sleeping and gave him a pat on the head to keep him alert. Then he turned to another disciple and asked him if he thought abilities were like sweat. Afterward, he turned back to the wolf man and told him he had misunderstood the tutorial tower. While speaking, the only person besides the protagonist who truly knew what it meant to feel the danshin was that old man who was also meditating. Even so, the protagonist decided to explain, and they better pay attention because he would only say it once. He said that when a human resonated with mana for the first time, a storage space opened within their body. He explained that the more one trained, the larger the danshin would become, and thus it would store more mana. Now his red-haired disciple understood how crucial it was to learn more about that essence that was still unfamiliar to him. The protagonist said that was why meditation training to control mana was the best method. He was angry with the wolf man and with an elder, telling them that just because they were wearing collars didn't mean he would go easy on them. Meanwhile, cautiously stepping through the door, his friend said the protagonist hadn't answered his calls. And the protagonist's response was even worse. He said he didn't answer because he called too many times, like a stalker. He told him he needed to head to headquarters immediately. The branch manager had requested his presence. While walking, he wanted to know what the branch manager was looking for. Then Seo stopped and looked at the man, asking if he'd gone around using his name. As the two walked through the agency, they noticed that two people stopped them and started talking excessively. Among them, the red-haired one was more provocative and wanted to know what magic Seo had used to start getting results. Meanwhile, Byong-gu, very irritated, told the protagonist that Bastard had already returned from his assignment. He told the redhead that since he was back from work, he should keep quiet instead of starting trouble. Then Sung Chang-won started talking about the protagonist, wanting to know who he was to have caused so many problems. Meanwhile, Seo pretended none of it was about him and simply cleaned his ear, thinking about what he'd eat later. Then Byong-gu asked why they were wasting time and blocking their way. Hajun-tae spoke for the first time, saying they had been assigned to Japan. While they worried about continuing that dispute, the protagonist was just staring at his phone. Someone addressed him directly, calling him a rookie. They said that even if they weren't on the same team, they were still veterans, and he hadn't introduced himself. However, he told them to just get out of his way. The hallway wasn't a leisure area. Of course, neither of the two liked the rookie's greeting. It was completely disrespectful. As Hajun-tae listened to everything the young man said, he grew irritated. Then he told the red-haired friend not to worry. He would teach the rookie a lesson himself. Byong-gu told them they didn't seem to be using their brains. This was HQ, and they shouldn't be stirring up conflict. Even so, that redhead really wanted to continue. He thought the rookie was in the wrong and said he'd deal with him. The two were very serious, but the protagonist seemed to keep mocking everyone. The redhead was getting increasingly angry, saying he was a bastard, and everyone was watching the scene unfold. He thought he couldn't just let it slide, otherwise everyone would think he'd lost. After he said that, the protagonist and his friend went silent, which only boosted the redhead's confidence. He thought he was in control, until someone's hand touched his shoulder. It was branch manager Baek Gun-ho, meaning he was the one truly in charge there. After that incident, both of them decided to stay quiet since they were already in a bad spot. Speaking directly to Seo, he said he had been wondering why he hadn't shown up. Now those two troublemakers had to watch the manager flatter the protagonist, offering his hospitality. Even so, the redhead still seemed like he wanted to say something, but he was silenced. The manager didn't care about him. He had already heard the rumors about his recent work in Japan. If he wanted to be in charge, he should start doing the job properly and stop wasting time on nonsense. And after those harsh words from the manager, they had to keep watching the rookie being flattered. So he was taken to the management room, treated like royalty, and there the flattery continued. But the protagonist didn't like wasting time, not even with flattery. That's what made the manager get straight to the point. He wanted him to explain the reason he had been called. He made it clear he wanted to ask about the transport mission from Incheon prison. While the tea was served on the table, the man talked about the prison case and, at the same time, about the mercenaries. Still, he wanted to know what had happened to the fugitive president. He said it didn't make sense that someone strong enough to defeat a guild's inner circle would just lose track of the fugitive. The matter was restricted to the protagonist only, so the manager asked Jung-gu to leave. Of course, he left, but he didn't like it all being dismissed while the protagonist stayed behind. After he left, the manager told the hunter that he wasn't an irrational man. He said he had known the hunter Jung-gu for a long time and knew he wasn't capable of investigating and eliminating an organization on his own. It was hard to believe everything, especially when someone as mysterious as the newcomer was involved in it all. That's why he sought advice from an old acquaintance, and it turned out he knew the hunter very well. That made the protagonist briefly interested in what the director was saying. He said the person was a legend among the first-generation hunters, one of the three lords. The man in question was the master of a famous guild, an S-rank hunter. Everything had been arranged for those two to have a conversation. He started by saying he never believed the story about his death, but the protagonist was shocked by the aged appearance of his old friend. He now looked at Kang-ho, an old comrade, one of the first-generation hunters. His friend wanted to know why, even after all those years missing, his face still looked the same. He also said that his disciples had been worried. The conversation was going so well that Seju decided to order another bottle. He said he felt like there was so much to talk about. After telling him the details of what he went through in 100 years in another world, the protagonist explained that after he eliminated the demon king of the fourth dimension, he was pulled in. He was surprised by the news that the demon was still alive. It was unbelievable that humans and demons had signed a peace treaty. His friend said that first of all, the demon from the fourth dimension was indeed still alive. However, he explained that his situation was bad, and after the war between humans and demons, the demons had been weakened, and the war dragged on for years. The world was a mess, with monster attacks everywhere. But in that situation, a draining war between demons and humans, under those circumstances, the demons took the initiative and proposed a peace treaty. They offered to help repair the damage in several countries, and they requested a territory in the Arctic where they could stay until they found a way back. It seemed like the path humanity should follow. During that time, top hunters representing countries gathered together, and ever since the treaty, the demons hadn't left the designated territory. Of course, there were first-generation hunters who doubted the demons' proposal. That hunter was one of those who suspected the enemy's movements, and over time, even began to doubt the existence of the Mad Dog. The protagonist's existence had disappeared from all records over the past 10 years. Even he couldn't remember the features clearly until he saw him again. The two were friends and had fought many battles together. The protagonist's doubt was whether the demons and Choi Dae-soo had made a separate deal. His friend couldn't say for sure, but to defeat Seju, Choi was capable of anything. Nagi asked whether that hunter was really in league with the demons. Just imagining that man trying to erase his existence was too much. But the demons hadn't shown any movements up until now. In fact, they even seemed to have helped humanity adapt to mana. However, the protagonist knew they were the ones to blame for starting the war. But he wanted to know more about his disciples and what had happened to them. Even though they had all scattered and it wasn't easy to bring them together again, the old friend thought he should at least try to find Yowa. That girl who had been a complete rookie 10 years ago was now leading a guild. She was adorable, and he hadn't expected someone like her to become a subordinate of Choi Dae-soo. The protagonist believed she must have her own reasons. Even though he was drinking, he thought the beverage tasted terrible. He figured that for the brother to have grown so much, the friend must have been overprotective. While the two were talking, someone was spying and even took a photo. Then they called someone to report that he was with Kang-ho. After that, the woman thanked them for the information and asked them to return. It was the same woman speaking earlier, the promising red-haired disciple. When she looked at the photo, she confirmed it was indeed Nim Seo-woo. After all that time, she had discovered he was alive. She had requested an investigation into the strange movements of the Empire Guild. Her suspicions had started after the uproar at the tutorial tower. But now it was real. Her master had truly returned. Ever since she started working with Choi, Sejin had stopped giving her information. So she requested someone to bring Kenshu just in case. Now she found out he was alive and well. But that wasn't the time for memories. She needed to reunite with him. While walking down the hallway, determined to make that meeting happen, she was called by her superior. The man, very astute, was observing the young woman's behavior. Choi Dae-soo preferred to be called uncle whenever they were alone. He noticed something was off and asked what was going on, saying it's nothing would have been an exaggeration. He had never seen that expression on her face. He concluded it must be true, so the mad dog was back, and placing his hand on her shoulders, he chuckled at the news. She was about to run off to find him. Choi Da-soo's laughter came from thinking Yu-hua was foolish and naive. She was all he had left of his family, and he wouldn't let her go so easily. His niece disagreed. She was going to find her master. That old fox knew very well how to keep an eye on valuable hunters, and he wasn't willing to hand over a financial asset to his enemy. She also wasn't willing to be treated like a mere useful worker. However, Choi Da-soo was prepared to spread the secret about the criminal paternity. He knew just how ruthless Min Soo was with criminals. Before leaving, he left something for the girl to reflect on, how her master would react. The tree might have changed, but the roots were still the same. Although Yu-hua thought her uncle was a bastard, she knew he might be right. Meanwhile, in another location, inside a large corporation full of people, a couple didn't seem satisfied at all. They were waiting for Min Soo. He was the one personally leading the joint training that day, and they wanted to be sure whether those people would be joining as well. The protagonist wanted them to see those two as seniors in experience. The young woman was the hunter Kim, and the man was someone who treated everything like a joke. The old hunter knew he wasn't welcome, but he was also an old fox and knew how to deal with arrogant youngsters. He said those pretty-faced kids looked smart and would learn fast. Before starting, the bear got scolded. He needed to take things seriously. They were heading toward the gate that connected dimensions. The young woman looked nervous, but the protagonist explained it was just a portal. The man showed signs of fear, as if he might be swallowed by one of the gates. The more experienced hunter said that private guilds had their own gates because they were safer. What used to be a catastrophe had long ago become a profitable business. Everything was about money, and if they were scared from the start, they gained nothing. As soon as they passed through the gate, the scenery changed. They were in another dimension. The man noticed that unlike the tower, there were no monsters at the entrance here. In the 5th generation, being a hunter was just another job with a defined resume, and they only learned real combat after joining a guild. It seemed they were producing weak beings who would be wiped out by a single major wave. The protagonist needed them to demonstrate their skills before starting real combat. Though he obeyed, that man didn't agree with being taught by a stranger. To make things worse, beside him was a rookie who couldn't even manifest her abilities. The young woman was happy to have partially manifested her power. It was obvious she was a danger to everyone, but with a single gesture, she managed to impress them all. To enhance her talents, the protagonist threw something to her. When she caught that whip, she wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. It was a catalyst meant to assist with complex carvings in her unique abilities. She held the whip and positioned it, focusing again to release her ability. He looked so pathetic that the man didn't even want to look at him, but he got all nervous when he saw a few goblins. The protagonist, standing a good distance from the two, asked the man to make the goblins come down. It was yet another task he really didn't enjoy having to do. The old hunter knew that a tracking type skill like that was difficult to master, and the way he was using mana would leave him drained in no time. That man thought goblins might be relatively easy monsters to deal with. The worst part was that his assistant wasn't available to help. As expected, that unbalanced mana release left him exhausted. It was the perfect moment to be attacked by a goblin. However, the huntress was already prepared. Her skill was Beast Tamer. She had activated her A+ rank ability, and with a single move she managed to subdue the goblin. She ordered it to take a step back. The tamer's commands could not be disobeyed. Now the goblin was at her mercy, imitating her movements. The bear was surprised by the girl's ability. It was incredibly rare. The parasite, as soon as it saw the girl's skill, also showed interest and wanted to feed on her. His master asked what he planned to do with just one target under control. His response was to shake his partner until he woke up. After some time, they returned, and the bear was carrying the unconscious man. The training session for Kim had been productive. She now had a better understanding of how to use her ability. The protagonist made it clear that he would become more and more demanding. Kim didn't mind because she genuinely wanted to go beyond just awakening a skill. She had been mistaken for a long time, thinking that awakening alone made someone exceptional. Now she knew that awakening was only the first step. He told her that if she needed help, she could ask the bear or the old man. But as they looked ahead, they noticed unexpected company. Kim had heard there was a negotiation happening with the Chinhua Guild. The protagonist watched those people closely. Seeing her master change so much worried young Kim. Yuhua heard the people talking beside her but just observed her former master. It was being reported that the people found had their bodies preserved, but their insides were damaged by an explosion. While the redhead was thinking about what might have happened to the bodies, she was interrupted by her old master arriving and greeting her. He looked at her and said that since her master had returned, she still hadn't come to greet him. Even knowing he was back, she was still speechless. Embarrassed, she pretended she hadn't heard about his return. She apologized, she had business to handle, so she simply turned her back and walked away. The parasite, seeing that Sue had been rejected, offered to comfort him. The time he had spent near her had been enough to notice that she had cried. He just didn't know the reason. finding her hidden, crying in a corner, used to be a common occurrence. In those moments, he would sit beside her and tell her there was no need to hide. He would say that anyone could see she had been crying. She was certain her master was favoring her friend with advanced training, while she was just a lost child who had been saved by the master. She appreciated the fact that he had saved her when she was homeless and starving, but he always treated everything she said as a joke. He said that being born in that chaotic world was already bad enough, and that's why he chose his own family, and she was like a sister to him. Though she initially refused, she thought he should at least ask if that was what she wanted, and he still pushed her training to the limit every single day. She never wanted to be the master's little sister or his top disciple. She always wanted to stand beside him as an equal, strong enough to support his vision of the world. However, along the way, she dared to develop feelings she shouldn't have. Even if she had been abandoned, she was still the daughter of a despicable criminal. Even so, she was willing to fight for the master who had given her a new life. And when she arrived to discuss the matter in the office of the Empire Guild's director, the protagonist's younger brother was surprised by her presence. He informed her that there was still a long time before the guild's meeting. However, her matter was important and would require his time. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the old friend was seeking answers. He was speaking with Dasu about when the first gates appeared, and how the three sovereigns fought on the front lines against the demons, but he needed to know if he had made some kind of unavoidable deal with the demons. However, the man with the eye patch didn't think there was any need to soften the question. He already knew that after meeting Nim Suu, doubts would start to form. He now knew that 10 years hadn't been enough for the mad dog to change his mind, but it was clear he wasn't seeking peace among nations or the well-being of humanity. He laughed when he remembered what he had heard about the three sovereigns. Power existed to feed the hunger of those who hungered for power. Mana was the force granted to humans, and that's why he would test its limits. All the world leaders had shaken hands with the demons, and it wasn't just for peace. At that time, everyone had agreed the deal was necessary. Hearing those words, the man with the long hair didn't have much to say. It was already confirmed there had been an agreement between him and the demons regarding Nin Siwu. Choi Dasu thought what mattered was that the mad dog had returned, and when he thought of confronting him, he looked ahead and was stunned. Near the window of that building, he was looking up. Siwu was outside the magic circle. He wanted to get some answers from that man. After greeting him, he used a bit of mana to break the glass, just to get inside and have a proper conversation. Choi seemed to have been eagerly waiting for that day. He arrived complaining that getting in was a bit of a hassle. He would get straight to the point before his little soldiers could show up. He wanted to know if that man had conspired with Pandemonium. Choi Dasu had expected more from the mad dog, who once wouldn't have wasted time on such things, but the protagonist was losing patience. Choi noted that in 10 years that face hadn't suffered a single scratch. After 10 years vacationing in another world, there was no reason to invade his home. He wanted to know what had made him so furious. Min Siwu wanted to tear his limbs apart and drag him across dimensions. He also wanted to know about the elimination of Jung Ninjun. He wanted to know if that man had cared about Yuhua or any other disciple. Choi Dasu looked delighted. That was the mad dog he knew, and that's why he burst out laughing. He said that bloody battlefield energy was something nostalgic, but he had used his position to compete with strong hunters and defeated them all. Smiling, he said an old rival like Siwu didn't even make a niche. He must have been boiling with enough rage to risk both their lives in a fight. The protagonist showed he was ready for a direct fight if necessary, but at that moment, their mutual friend intervened and asked them to calm down and think. He asked if they didn't realize how heavy their positions and responsibilities were. They couldn't involve civilians in a fight between SSRank hunters. He said it wasn't like the lawless days of the past anymore. A fight would draw public attention. It could cause trouble for his brother and make the guild look like it was rebelling against the government. Choi Dasu still found that long-haired man just as annoying as ever. He preferred the old days when they could fight to the death. They constantly showed their fangs to one another in battles to the end. He would give him an answer for causing him a brief moment of excitement. He had nothing to do with the death of Jung Minjun, and Kang Yuhua had come to him of her own free will. As for the disappointed disciples, that wasn't his problem. But Siwu could come back another time with more questions. He'd prepare a place with no restrictions. The long-haired man, after managing to avoid a fight, sighed in relief. As Choi was heading down the elevator, a subordinate informed him that strange noises had been detected. He ordered the man to find Muriang Desu to prepare an A and E class gate. Elsewhere, the protagonist's brother was thinking about the meeting he'd had with Kang Yuhua. During the conversation, they discussed the hunters' bodies found around the gates. They might have faced an opponent with a peculiar ability, or perhaps they had all consumed something together, and they all had a connection to an unknown guild. That guild operated near the gate they had discovered. There were rumors that the guild's leader was a demon. She said people hurt a lot when working close to the government. They were definitely making moves. She would keep updating as they discovered more. Lastly, she warned that Choi Dasu was keeping an eye on his guild, which was why she hadn't contacted him. He should wait for her to reach out first, and also he shouldn't tell their master. because she had no intention of coming back, and it was just as he had suspected. She hadn't spent 10 years at his side. She had been watching him. He thought it was strange that she was distancing herself from them now of all times. It happened suddenly. As soon as his brother returned, she started acting strangely. Among the 3 closest disciples of Min Siwoo, he trusted them all. But his brother felt like each of them was burdened with their own secrets. That's why, for the younger brother, it was hard to fully trust any of them. He was caught off guard while lost in thought. His brother arrived and wanted to know what had happened. There was no point in hiding it, as he already knew about Yua's visit, and he wanted to know what was going on with her. Meanwhile, the girl was outside, near the members of her guild. That's when she was summoned. Choi Desu was waiting for her, and it was urgent. In that case, she had no choice but to obey the call. 10 years ago, right after the protagonist disappeared, Choi Desu sought out a demon. He wanted help erasing the memory of his existence. Hikatan, a demon race affiliated with the Demon King, leader of the 2nd Division. That demon wanted to ensure the negotiation would benefit his race. But the two were both negotiators, and each wanted to gain the upper hand in the deal. Choi Desu agreed to have the demons help repair the damage. That demon had been observing the hunter for a long time and knew he had an interest in war. He enjoyed fighting to the limit, and with a new rule, that would be restricted. He also liked choosing strong opponents to prove his worth. The demon proposed helping him reach the peak of his mana. Choi Desu was an experienced hunter and analyzed the offer carefully. He thought it was nonsense. He believed they'd go to any lengths just to erase their defeat. He considered whether accepting the offer would impact the demons, but the demon said the demon's life expectancy was much higher. They had plenty of time to uncover the true nature of mana and the gates. He said he would wait. He would wait for the hunter's positive answer. In the present, that man was inside one of the guild's exclusive gates. The assistant informed him that, as requested, they had prepared an empty and worthless gate. That gate was the exclusive property of Desu's guild and had no public access records. He wanted to confirm whether all the invitations had been correctly delivered. However, one assistant was worried about the summit scheduled for the next day. But that wasn't the thought Choi Desu wanted to dwell on at that moment, especially not with the arrival of the person he had been waiting for. His niece was very angry. He had summoned her to such a dreadful place. So he asked her to speak respectfully, as there he was more than just her uncle. While the assistant trembled, the girl wanted to know what was going on. Choi Desu got straight to the point. He knew she believed he had played a critical role. He said that, at the time, he neither responded to nor cooperated with the demon's proposals. He also didn't care about the disappearance of Min Siwoo. Yoa wasn't exactly sure what nonsense he was spouting, but the fact that he hadn't acted back then still haunted her thoughts. He needed to be certain who was stronger, her master or himself. She looked at him, ready to strike, and knew he had gone mad. Hearing about the demons offered to him filled her with disgust. Now she was sure he was involved in all of it. It was clear he had played a role in her master's disappearance and the erased records. Choi Desu said she was acting just like her mother, the same irritating temper with a slow brain that made it hard to grasp the situation. He made it clear that she was nothing more than a tool to carry out Min Siwoo's desire for revenge. He wanted to tear away the shadow of inferiority that haunted his life. And now that Min Siwoo had returned, it was time to erase his final remnants. Yoa, the key, there was no way her master had fallen into such a pathetic trap just to save her. But he was sure it would work. In the past, when her master wasted time on the family charade, it was hard to believe. But after the visit he had received, he could see in his eyes that something had changed over the years. She would be just the spark, since he knew nothing about the death of Jung Nim Jun. He wanted to play his cards to make the most of the game. He said there was no point in trying to resist the chains. Not even an S-rank hunter could break them. The more she tried to struggle, the more the chains would absorb her mana. She was certain that doing something like that wouldn't change the trash she had become. A presence changed everything she had been believing. Suddenly, she saw that her master had appeared and was instantly fighting. Choi Desu was thrilled. From that moment on, history would be rewritten. The outdated hero of the past would die right there. The protagonist thought it was all nonsense. That talk of rewriting history as the strongest on Earth was foolishness. Choi Desu thought differently. He now believed the mad dog was slow, and the 10 years had only widened the gap in strength between them. Even the protagonist's parasite was worried, since he still hadn't fully recovered his strength. Min Siwoo didn't have time to worry about that nonsense. He warned his parasite that they were going in with full force. The parasite wouldn't be able to absorb an ability of that scale in a weak body. Half would be 50% of the power he used in the other world. For him, that was enough. Choi Desu wanted to know why the protagonist was talking to himself, but he got a rather unusual answer. Suwoo approached his opponent like lightning and warned that half was more than enough. This was a battle between the so-called first-generation hunters, those who were considered the true awakened. She understood there was a power gap between S-rank and SS-rank, but the discrepancy was massive. Meanwhile, the man with the eye patch was savoring the sensation. He was indulging in discarding all the restraints that had held him back. It had been 10 years, and even now that man still liked collecting toys. Now he was causing chaos by trying to clash their mana together. The parasite wondered if Choi Dasu, with that kind of power, was even human. He could fight on equal terms with a high-level demon. The scale he was using didn't look like an ordinary artifact either. Suwoo thought the enemy always had some gorilla-like traits, but in the end, he was just an incomplete human, with severe inferiority issues and arrogance that always needed to be measured. And now he could finally release all that on the battlefield. He constantly provoked the mad dog, reveling in his own power. He had longed for a fight where he could let loose without any obstacles. After unleashing a powerful attack, all he managed to do was make a small crack, so he grabbed a different weapon to keep the fun going. He was determined to bring that barrier down until it turned to dust. Suwoo had some interesting tricks he could show Choi. The ice sphere he had made was easily shattered by the hammer. He said it wouldn't be easy to defeat an old master. Min Suwoo warned that he was holding back and should unleash her first. He paused briefly and warned that he wouldn't tolerate such a dishonorable move. Choi Dasu knew he'd been holding back from the beginning. He wanted a real fight. He said he deserved one because the prize he had was valuable enough. He asked if that honor wasn't enough for the daughter of a serial killer. Yu Hua, upon hearing him reveal the secret, panicked and screamed for him to stop. Through tears, she begged him not to say another word. Min Suwoo listened to Choi and told the girl not to move. If she kept going, the chains might start to hurt her. That sudden gesture left Choi Dasu slightly thrown off. Seeing the protagonist release a larger amount of power made him feel satisfied. He was anxious to finally begin a real duel. But like before, the protagonist rushed in like a lightning bolt. He told him to shut up. He didn't want to hear his voice anymore. Choi Dasu noticed that the way he controlled mana had changed. Even the density was different. He thought Suwoo was still clinging to the same cowardly, limited style. But the protagonist believed that man didn't know a thing about tactics. Choi Dasu said that back then, he was young and didn't have the perception he has now. But thanks to that last attack, he now saw clearly. Those words left the protagonist slightly confused. Choi Dasu was certain that boy was no longer just another equal. After a devastating attack where nothing could be seen, the girl grew worried. She cried out for her master, looking around in hopes he would appear at any moment. His echoed voice said that of all the nonsense he'd heard, that was the only true statement. The two of them really weren't the same. Even though the attack seemed incredibly strong, it was easily blocked, leaving the old man surprised. He hadn't expected his legendary sword to be stopped. The old man tried to use more strength, but it was still useless, and he ended up getting hit. He was thrown far back by the force of the punch. Even while getting punched, the old man said it was fun. He asked the protagonist if he had saved up all his mana for that one strike. But without waiting for an answer, he assumed yes, and said he would now go all out to balance things. He revealed that around 5 years ago, all SS-rank hunters in the world were forced to wear that bracelet. It served to suppress both physical and mana-based abilities. If turned off without authorization, the hunter would be labeled a criminal, and he said he found it all repugnant. Min Suwoo only humiliated him, saying that dog collar suited a beast that only knew how to fight. He asked if he had climbed the ranks just to get government approval to fight like a pit dog. The old man told the protagonist he was overestimating himself way too much, and until now he hadn't found anyone worth testing that power on. Min Suwoo tells the old man to show him what he's got. Just by watching, the redhead is sure that this mana clash could cause the gate to collapse. If a collapse happens, the resulting power could end up hurting innocent people. As she breaks free, she thinks that she needs to stop it quickly. The old man slams his hammer into the ground, imbued with power, causing major destruction. But the protagonist dodges using a lightning step ability. The situation leaves the old man stunned. He hadn't expected the gap between them to still be so wide. Even the idea of it drives him slightly insane. He grabs a spear and hurls it at the protagonist. The spear flies forward with the aura of a beast. When the spear bites him, he wonders if there's a sealed beast inside it. Then he activates a taming ability. And after taming the old man's artifact, he asks what the old man's been doing for the past 10 years to still be so weak. He mocks the old man once again, just when they're about to settle things for good. The redhead comes in and interrupts. She asks if the two of them have lost their minds, and if they have any idea what'll happen if all that magic leaks into the world. She throws it in the old man's face, that if that happens, even he won't escape responsibility. She says she's already contacted CHNCS, and it won't be long before they open the gate, and she asks them to stop the fight. The protagonist stares but says nothing. Choi picks up his bracelet again, and he's contacted by someone from the HNCS headquarters. They say it's an urgent matter and ask President Choi to make time to deal with it. Since it's urgent, old Choi leaves immediately. Before leaving, he says some senseless nonsense and tells them to leave. He's lost interest now. In her thoughts, the redhead says he was the last person she ever wanted to meet. But no matter what happens, she never wanted to betray the sincerity and kindness he showed her. If he asks her, what should she say? She can't tell him that the disciple he cared for is the daughter of a criminal. Then the protagonist asks Kangwa if she's okay. She's happy to receive such kindness from her master. Old Choi asks why they're going so far based on the testimony of a single hunter. He says that legally speaking, there was no violation. Of course, the hunter contacting HNCS first caused confusion at the headquarters, but responding with full force to a small training session and a closed gate is an overreaction. He asks Mr. Edward Blackwood, vice president of the HQ, if he understands his point of view. Edward politely explains to his superior that the situation escalated the moment the limiter was removed. SSRank hunters are prohibited from engaging in private fights, and using magic against an HNCS affiliate qualifies as grounds for arrest. Given his position as the leader of a nation, there's also a possibility of facing international trial. Even if no national law was violated, under international law there are grounds for charges. But in these peaceful times, there's no need for chaos over such an incident. So he asks the president to resolve the matter internally. They will overlook the incident but still listen to the person involved for proper evaluation. The vice president says he'll have to meet the man who fought the president. In the end, it was all about Min Se-woo. Since that was the case, the president would await the vice president in Korea. In his thoughts, the president felt humiliated. He had realized the difference between himself and Min Se-woo 10 years ago. He had been sure he had surpassed him, but over 10 years, the gap only grew tremendously. He had done everything he could to grow stronger, and it was still useless. The strength he had kept restrained was still not enough. He had finally found a challenging opponent. 1 week later, at the Chonhwa Guild, the protagonist is scolding Kangwa. She apologizes and says she didn't greet him because she felt unworthy. Min Se-woo asks the redhead if she had been investigating Ninjin's case this whole time. She only apologizes and says the only certainty she has is that it wasn't someone from the country. She explains that the reason Choi Dae-soo kept her as a subordinate was purely for profit. She adds that she's not defending him just because of blood ties. The guy really is innocent. Min Se-woo says he understands, and that if Choi Dae-soo saw her as family, he wouldn't have been so despicable. Kangwa says that now she's okay. The protagonist simply says not to chain oneself to bloodlines, and that it doesn't matter what kind of life her mother lived. What matters is the life Kangwa chose to live. If she feels guilty about it, she just needs to redeem herself by living righteously. She says she truly never lived alone. She always had help from others. Besides that, she feels sorry for Tae-jun because she made him go through unnecessary stress. From his point of view, it must have been hard to reveal his secrets to her. The protagonist tells her to talk to Tae-jun the next day. She asks why it has to be tomorrow and hesitates, even with Min Se-woo saying there's no problem. Min Se-woo changes the subject and says he doesn't know how, but Choi managed to clean up the mess without causing a stir. Jung-gun shows up, saying he had something urgent to talk about with the protagonist, but he hadn't answered the phone. But he's interrupted by another man saying that the international HQ of HNCS had called, and says that Vice President Blackwood will personally come to Korea to meet the protagonist. Then the protagonist exclaims that this will be a pain. He wonders why the vice president wants to meet him. The man replies that there's a gag order on the entire branch, and they weren't given any details. It was the first time something like this had happened in the history of the Korean HNCS branch. Since there's a gag order, the protagonist won't reveal anything. The men say they understand and will call once the official meeting time is set, and they leave, arguing about how to get the protagonist to spill what he knows, although it doesn't seem like a good idea. Kangwa and Min Se-woo leave to avoid curious stares. They talk while walking. The protagonist asks what her next step will be. She says she'll follow his lead. Minjin's death left a lot to uncover. A familiar car pulls up near them, and unsurprisingly, it's Choi Dae-soo, who had unfinished business with them. Choi Dae-soo asks the protagonist to get in the car. The protagonist asks why he should. Old Choi says that if he and Kangwa are going to keep playing this master and disciple game, they should at least hear him out. Min Se-woo says goodbye to Kangwa and says he'll contact her later. On the road, the protagonist tells the old man he's got guts. Even after being beaten, he doesn't seem ashamed. President Choi says the result was inconclusive since they were interrupted. He also says he wants to have an internationally approved official match soon. The protagonist says it's hard to believe someone like Choi is president of anything. Old Choi changes the subject, saying that Pandemonium is a group that should have been wiped out, but wasn't. It has remnants scattered across the world. After Min Se-woo disappeared 10 years ago, demons contacted President Choi through those remnants. They asked for help erasing Min Se-woo's records. Apparently, they're just cultists who trust in unknown powers. Ever since Pandemonium fell and the demons were pushed to the polar regions, most of them vanished. Even after that, many world leaders have kept close watch over the demons, but there have been no reports or sightings of them. Recently, a group of half-demons was discovered in the deserts of the Middle East. They are children born of humans and demons, and people who were partially transformed. Unlike normal demons, these don't have physical traits but possess dark mana. That's all he heard from government officials. Judging by the dark mana the protagonist uses, the president asks if he spent the last 10 years working with demons. He mockingly asks if even Min Suwoo, known for hating demons, joined them for power. Tired of the provocation, the protagonist says if the president is done talking, then stop the car, he's getting out. As he gets out of the car, the protagonist tells old Choi to stop with these stupid ideas. People stir when they hear about the audit. Then the audit begins, and the protagonist is introduced to the vice president of HMCS. Mr. Blackwood says it's a pleasure to meet him. The protagonist asks directly what the vice president is planning. Blackwood asks the branch director to leave the room so he can speak privately with Min Suwoo. Baek Gun-ho was going crazy with curiosity, but he couldn't defy a superior. He walks away and in his thoughts asks the protagonist to be careful. Once they're alone, Edward loses his composure and curses at the protagonist. He asks where the protagonist has been for the past 10 years. But even so, he's happy that the protagonist has returned. Min Suwoo tells Edward to sit down because the story is a long one. He explains everything to Edward, who has a hard time believing it. Although he admits it's not entirely impossible. Once, the protagonist was one of the most important figures in the world, but his existence was nearly erased. But this revelation seems to have cleared his mind. The protagonist says it's curious how Edward remembered him just from hearing his name. Blackwood says he could never forget him. He had saved him multiple times. Min Suwoo asks how he and Yeowa came into contact. Edward says that HNCS headquarters, along with the guilds, have been investigating cases around the world. Since Yeowa is a guild leader and has made major contributions in a recent case, he obtained her contact information. He asks if the protagonist wants to transfer to the main headquarters. Min Suwoo says no, although he doesn't have a specific reason. Blackwood tries to convince the protagonist that a talent like his should be at the main HQ. Besides, he would be the trustworthy right hand Edward needs. The protagonist says he appreciates the trust, but he's investigating a case. Edward says that at HQ, the protagonist could benefit from the headquarters' resources and authority. Min Suwoo says he'll think about it and asks what this joint investigation is about. In the desert, a high casualty incident occurred in and around the gate. The cause was poisoning. They suspect illegal enhancement products. The protagonist asks if it's awakening drugs. Edward confirms, but says they don't have solid evidence yet and don't know the supply source. But HQ has been investigating a series of awakened individuals who have died around the world in recent months. The autopsies of the victims showed cellular-level ruptures in their internal organs. Officially, most of the victims were criminals, and no traces of illegal substances were found, until a witness appeared in China who saw a similar case. According to the witness, the awakened inhaled a black powder before going into a frenzy and self-destructing. Those who inhaled it experienced mana surges and ability boosts, like lighting bombs, wiping everything out before detonating. The protagonist asks if this illegal awakening boosting substance is connected to the desert incident. Blackwood says that area is likely the origin of this whole case involving illegal enhancement substances. Min Suwoo asks why the desert is being considered the starting point. Edward says the gate that was discovered was right beside a pile of dead bodies. Right at the entrance, the Chinonwa Guild managed to secure a sample of the black powder, and near the gate, there was a vehicle belonging to a commercial guild called Eyes. There were no violations linked to them, and at first glance, it looks like a normal small guild, but something feels off. The protagonist says this is annoying. Blackwood says he already knew Kang Yeowa was the protagonist's disciple, but since she was the first to obtain the substance, he had no choice but to get involved. He says that if the protagonist helps Kang, it'll make the whole matter easier to handle. Edward asks if the protagonist is going to ignore the situation even with his disciple involved. Min Suwoo says he'll help. Blackwood asks what happened between him and Choi. If it was an unauthorized training match, he can take care of it. The protagonist says he doesn't need help dealing with that power-hungry maniac. In another scene, he's already getting ready to go to HQ. He tells his friend that Edward personally invited him. His friend asks how he got in contact with such a big shot. In short, some things happened, but it wasn't the time to talk about it. The conversation is interrupted by a call from Yeowa. Min Suwoo talks again to the being inside him. Frey says something strange is happening to him. After they returned to Earth and he began adapting to its mana, he's losing control. He explains that the effects of the dimensional travel weighed on both of them. After that battle where his mana production was pushed to the limit, the side effects appeared. That was likely the trigger, since they made a contract in the other world, he can't attack the protagonist. But the stronger the protagonist's mana becomes, the worse the effects get. If he loses control, there's no telling what consequences they might face. The protagonist says he doesn't rely on the being's powers that much, so for now it's fine. Min Soo explains that, in fact, he does rely on the being's powers to eliminate demons, but that's not a major problem. As irritating as it had been, that warm-up with Choi Dae-soo ended up being useful. 2 days later, already at HNCS headquarters, some people voiced concerns about calling the protagonist for the investigation. They said the team already had a specialist. They were completely underestimating the protagonist. Then the team leaders gathered there were called into a meeting in the conference room. Team leader Hikari asked if the protagonist had arrived, but he was still at the airport with Vice President Edward. Team leader Layla asked who this hunter was that made the vice president greet him in person. His name is Min Soo, a Korean hunter. Blackwood began the conference by thanking them for taking the time to be there. He introduced Min Soo from the Korean branch. From the European branch, they had Layla and Stefan, and from the Asian branch, there was Hikari and her assistant Kumo. Blackwood said he would be brief since it was an urgent situation. He asked Layla to give a brief summary of the case. He noted that everyone was aware of the situation, but since the case was confidential, they needed to be cautious with sensitive information. Before the vice president left to tend to his business, he said he would be waiting for results. Team leader Layla proceeded with the meeting. This was case A3942-SC, also known as the illegal enhancement drug case. Team 1 was assigned to investigate the location where the raw form of the drug was first discovered. The gate initially found at the site was ranked A. A total of 6 bodies were discovered near the gate, and autopsies revealed internal damage consistent with previous cases. Illegal enhancement substances were found among those bodies. The gate had only traces of battle near the entrance, with no other unusual findings. No enhancement substance was found inside the gate. Once the investigation is complete, it will be determined whether or not to authorize an official raid on the gate. In addition, a vehicle from the IZ Guild was found near the location. An investigation confirmed that IZ's activity was legitimate and legalized, and nothing irregular was found. The investigation they would conduct soon would focus on exploring the inside of the gate. She asked if there were any questions. The protagonist said he was already aware of that general situation. What he really wanted to know was about demons or half-demons. Layla asked if the protagonist was suspecting demon involvement in this case. It wasn't a suspicion, it was just a question. Based on the fact that substances created by humans are usually easy to trace back to their origin. If they were drugs made with abilities or magic detection skills would be enough to track the source. And he said that if there was any prior information about them or their connections, he'd like to know. Hikari said she didn't understand why the protagonist was bringing up something unrelated to the case. Min Soo bluntly said whether it was related or not could only be known after investigating. He only mentioned what was relevant based on what he had heard. Hikari, who had just been brought into the matter, shouldn't cite what not even the experts at headquarters bothered to mention. She also said that if it were an important lead, headquarters would have already flagged it. It was already ridiculous that a regular hunter was involved in this. Now he was suddenly suspecting demons. She said it had been 10 years since humans and demons began cooperating, and that old racial prejudice was unacceptable. She still tried to insult the protagonist, but was interrupted by Layla. Stefan told everyone to calm down. Layla said that as elite investigators, specialists in their fields, they needed to know how to prioritize what mattered most. For now, the focus was the investigation itself. Now they would address the details of the desert expedition, which would happen the next day. And she concluded by telling them to prepare for the expedition. Hikari couldn't accept the protagonist's superior status. Ignoring Hikari's complaints, Layla said they should forget it and work together. She herself admitted it was bothering her, but she couldn't question it since the protagonist was more experienced. The protagonist already realized this was going to be annoying, especially with that mysterious being talking in his ear all the time. Edward suddenly appeared to compliment the protagonist. Min Soo told Blackwood he took too long to show up. Edward said the Awakened were still the same unstable and troublesome bombs they were 10 years ago. The protagonist said we only feel the weight of responsibility when we experience it firsthand. Blackwood asked what Min thought of the team. Min Soo said they wouldn't be a problem as long as they didn't interfere with his work. Hearing that only proved to Edward how much the protagonist hadn't changed, even after 10 years. He told the protagonist not to cause trouble, since he was now being backed by HNCS International Headquarters. Already out in the desert near the Middle East branch, a branch chief welcomes the investigation team. He says their accommodations are already arranged in the building, so they can rest comfortably. The vehicle that will take them to the gate has also been prepared. Layla thanks the branch chief and asks about the authorization to access the gate. The being that inhabits the protagonist complains about the heat. Even after surveying the area, the protagonist didn't find any trace of demons in the city. Hikari shows up to annoy the protagonist. She tells him to stay alert and focused if he doesn't want to die, which irritates the protagonist. Min Soo asks the branch chief about half-demons. He says he's never seen one, but there are rumors of a village deep in the desert where half-demons live. The protagonist also asks others if they know anything about the IZ Guild or if it's connected to demons. All the answers are negative. People can't distinguish humans from hybrids. The woman says it's harder to find demons now than it was 10 years ago, when demons were treated as outcasts, so most of them don't reveal themselves, simply posing as humans. The conclusion he comes to is that not even the locals have a way to know if there are demons there or not. There's no useful information around, so to find what he's looking for, he'll have to go deeper into the desert. As they walk, the shadowy being asks the protagonist if he's some kind of solitary recluse. Before the protagonist can scold him, he explains that he only asked because everyone he's seen so far is walking in a group, except for the protagonist who is alone. Min Soo explains that he's conducting a solo investigation. Layla calls out to Min Soo. She says that if he has nothing to do, he should rest at the HNCS branch instead of wandering around. She says she's using her personal time to check something and asks why she's alone. Her partner, Stefan, went to get the authorization for them to enter the gate. She asks if he was under the direction of Branch Chief Bake, because she doesn't recall seeing the protagonist there. Min says he was recruited recently. Layla comments that the protagonist gives off the aura of a seasoned veteran. He says he's not a veteran and asks about her. He's heard that Layla is quite well known in the European branch. Layla says no, she's just a regular investigator who mainly works in Northern Europe. Upon hearing she works in Northern Europe, the protagonist says he remembers working with a hunter from that region. His name was Hans Schroeder. She asks if it was that guy, showing a photo on her phone. The protagonist confirms after seeing the photo, even though he looks older, it's definitely the person he knew. Min Soo asks if he's her father or something like that. She says Hans is her uncle, and adds that she had no idea her uncle had any ties to Asian hunters, especially since they seem to be around the same age. Layla says that if her uncle were awake, he would be touched. She confides that her uncle has been unconscious for 2 years due to gate syndrome. Since mana and the gates are still mysteries, the infections and side effects they cause are equally unknown. Her uncle entered a gate to look for a missing companion and spent too much time inside. When the rescue team found him, he was already unconscious. Since that day, he's been kept alive with the healing abilities of hunters. She's been clearing high-level gates as often as possible, hoping to find something that can heal him. The protagonist asks if she's looking for an elixir. Layla says yes, though it may sound foolish, she has to try. Stefan calls out to Layla, telling her the gate entry has been approved and they can go when ready. She says they'll head out and that she'll talk to Hikari before they leave. In the next scene, they're already on the road. Hikari complains the entire trip about how there's too much sand in the desert. Stefan says they're almost there. It's just taking longer because the GPS doesn't work properly in the area. Kumo says they'll probably arrive at night, which complicates things a bit. The protagonist says that since the gate can lead anywhere, the climate, time, and environment inside follow different rules. Depending on where the gate connects, the sun might never set, or it could be an abyss where no ray of light dares enter. You can only know once you're inside. Hikari says that's basic knowledge, but that low-rank gates usually resemble Earth. She was about to say more, but the protagonist just gave a curt no. The gate also takes things from those who enter. It's more than just a point of passage. She mockingly asks if the protagonist is talking about gate syndrome, where idiots lose track of time and end up with shattered memories, becoming nothing but empty shells. He tells her not to say that in the middle of a group of veterans. Layla asks them both to calm down. They finally arrive at the gate. Hikari asks if they already know the gate's classification, and Kumo says the estimate is around rank A. The external cleanup seems complete. The protagonist senses that there's no remaining mana trace there. Nothing appeared unusual, except for the clear effort to erase all signs. But the unbearable Hikari tells Layla that if she wants to waste time, she can do it alone. They're going in right now. So everyone heads toward the gate. From a distance, a group watches. A white-haired man says that them entering without caution makes everything easier, and that the protagonist group is walking straight into their graves. They make a quick assessment after entering the gate. Then they begin the deep investigation at Gate K3 in the northern desert. Stefan admits he's tense after so long without entering a gate. Layla says the focus is the investigation, and she uses a skill to track monsters. In his thoughts, the protagonist acknowledges that Layla's skill is quite decent. Layla says she hasn't detected any monster activity within a 30 kilometers radius. She says she'll do her best to handle enemy detection and unusual signals. For now, they'll divide the area within the ability's range and proceed with the investigation. Preserving the scene is the priority, so they must avoid combat as much as possible. Hikari orders Kumo to scout the area. The protagonist mocks how Hikari gave a big speech only to send her subordinate to do the work. Layla tells everyone to spread out and begin the investigation. Before they split up, she says to report if they find anything unusual. Min Soo wonders why form a group if in the end they'll act separately. Frey says the protagonist is clearly a loner. The protagonist realizes someone had tampered with the site. That was definitely placed there intentionally by someone. He wonders if that could be demonic mana, so he calls his subordinate who's outside watching the gate. The old man says he followed the protagonist's orders and while keeping watch, saw a suspicious group approaching the gate. A total of 5 hooded individuals. Min Soo tells the old man to notify him when the individuals enter the gate. The old man asks if he should enter to help keep watch and ensure no one blocks the gate. Frey asks since when the old man has been secretly following them. Min Soo says the old man has been following them since they arrived in the country because he's qualified. Our main character wonders what kind of bizarre plant had been placed there to contaminate the mana of the area. But things will only get worse once the sun sets. In Hikari's investigation area, Kumo says he didn't find any traces, no monsters, no drugs. It didn't make sense. A gate that hadn't yet stabilized shouldn't be this clean. Kumo says there were many signs of fighting and drugs found outside the gate. We assume all those involved in the fight died. Hikari already understands the implication that maybe the victims never entered the gate. Nothing seemed to explain why the gate was so empty. Since the incident, access to the gate had been completely restricted. It should have left traces. Everything indicates that this gate was barely touched, so there should still be resources inside. There had to be something valuable in that gate, something to justify all the effort they went through. The branch chief has high expectations, and they can't return empty-handed. She'll find something even if she has to dig deep. She sends her divine spirit to churn the earth. Layla sees the ability from afar and wonders why she wasn't informed about it. She tells Stefan to go check it out. The moment she's left alone, the group of hooded figures ambushes her by surprise. Her ability ends up unearthing the bodies hidden there. Kumo says those aren't bodies, they're undead ghouls. It's unprecedented for undead-type monsters to be gathering in groups like this. Hikari says they'll find the cause after they deal with them. She attacks the ghouls with her spirit. Defeating them was pointless as more of them emerged from the ground. They rose from the soil in large numbers. Hikari ends up cornered and is about to be struck by them, but Stefan arrives just in time to save her. She asks the girl where all those monsters came from. Hikari throws the question back, saying Stefan should have noticed the buried monsters with detection magic. Stefan says the monsters must have come from much deeper underground after noticing the commotion Hikari caused. Kumo says it's not the time to argue and activates his combat skills. To defeat them, their heads had to be destroyed. Hikari says her ability needs living energy to be maintained, and undead barely have any. She tells Stefan to call his team leader, but he says there's no time. Kumo can't believe he's going to have to smash all those heads one by one. He and Hikari are at a disadvantage in that type of fight. Just when he thinks he's screwed, our protagonist shows up. With an area attack spell, he strikes the ghouls' heads with ease. That display of power leaves Hikari impressed. Now that they understand the enemy is undead, it made sense why Layla's ability hadn't detected them. Stefan tells everyone to return and try again the next morning. Kumo agrees with that. The protagonist says leaving is better than staying and destroying what's left of the scene, and another group is already heading toward them. Hikari asks why Stefan still hasn't contacted Layla. He says he tried, but she didn't answer, which is really strange, considering the chaos going on. The protagonist goes to look for Layla and leaves the others to handle the ghouls. He calls the old man and tells him to enter the gate and find the hooded ones. Min Soo is almost certain they took Layla. The scene shifts to Layla herself, captured. She wonders how they managed to reach the gate. One of them asks their boss if he can get rid of her, but the old man says no. She'll serve as bait to lure the others in. This time they won't make mistakes, and once the plan succeeds, they'll take control of the black market in that country. In a world where awakened ones are ranked only by power, low-level hunters pay a fortune for that powder. The thug knows what the drug can do, but what he really wants to know is how long they'll keep taking orders from that guy. Even though he seems like a complete weirdo, the white-haired man has a lot of power, because he's a half-demon with necromancy powers, a skill that toys with life and death, necromancy. This ability is considered one of the worst among summoning-type skills. Even he, who's been in the criminal underworld for some time, has never seen anything like it. But to rebuild the criminal organization his father left behind, he needs that man's connections. One of the lackey thugs wants to try the drug to see if he really gets stronger, but his captain stops him. With just a small vial, power surges up to rank S, and once someone experiences that effect, they can never stop. In the end, the body, clearly unfit for that much power, collapses and dies. They witnessed its effects firsthand. It's made with magic but can't be tracked by abilities. The gang leader tells the white-haired man that since they're a team, he at least deserves to know the origin of the drug. Ivan throws in his face that the old man couldn't manage his subordinates, and the result was the drug being discovered by international agencies. He can't trust him with crucial information. But Ivan compliments the old man for his persistence and shamelessness. Still, he can't reveal the secrets. Ivan says it'd be a problem if the captain's dumb subordinates leaked that information. The guys are almost about to start a fistfight, but the arrival of a female companion stops the fight, since she tells everyone to shut up before the investigators hear them. Ivan asks what brought her there. She says she came to see the senseless things he's been doing, but she advised him not to do anything that would endanger the half-demon group in the name of IZ. Ivan asked if those conservative words came from the leader. If it's a bother, they could just eliminate them, and tells Crow to let the leader know he doesn't need to worry. The way Ivan plays with corpses makes it seem like he doesn't even understand humans. Crow also says that having Layla there might be a risk. Ivan says he'll keep Layla there until he deals with the others. The girl explains. She says the risk here is him, not Layla. She tells him to think carefully. If they really are on the demon side, Ivan curses at Crow as she vanishes. The bandits can barely process what they just witnessed, but the boss immediately says they're going to pretend they didn't see anything. He adds that they'll continue with the plan and eliminate all the hunters from the investigation team. The scene shifts to the investigation team, who are still searching for Layla. Stefan says the situation is abnormally dangerous, and it would be better to call for reinforcements. Hikari says she prefers to keep going on her own, even though she's in no condition to do so. The protagonist asks why they followed him. Hikari says he shouldn't have acted alone, but Stefan just asks if the MC already knows where Layla is. Min-Soo explains that she was captured, but he already knows where she is. Kumo asks who could have kidnapped Layla, and the protagonist says it was probably the ghoul summoner. Stefan says that's not possible. The protagonist says it's clear this was all someone's plan, and if the others don't have the courage to follow him, they can stay behind. Stefan asks if there really is a summoner kidnapper inside that gate. They keep walking for a while, following the path the kidnappers took. The investigation team runs into the bandits. Hikari says to skip introductions and they charge in. Kumo attacks the bandit with glasses. The old bandit uses an ability as well. He says they'll regret facing him alone. Hikari stays out of the fight since her power might cause the cave to collapse. She already knows what to do to contribute. She's going to use the chaos to rescue Layla. But unfortunately, she ends up face to face with Ivan, who attacks and takes her down with ease. Kumo and Min-Soo see Hikari take a direct hit. The battlefield is in complete disarray. Min-Soo uses an ability on Hikari. It's a necromantic spirit magic, an ability that surprises the half-demon. Meanwhile, Kumo is trading blows with the other bandit. The protagonist has already realized they're at a disadvantage fighting a half-demon inside the gate. Ivan says he's going to use the MC as material, but Min-Soo obliterates the summoned ghouls with a cutting wind spell. The half-demon wonders what kind of experiences made the protagonist so skilled. He says he can summon monsters almost infinitely. Our protagonist tells Frey they'll need to push harder to win, unleashing a rain of lightning on the ghouls. Ivan was unpleasantly surprised at how advanced the protagonist's mana control is. The protagonist says he's the one who's surprised, because he's never seen a drug addict speak so clearly. The provocation really irritates the half-demon. He says he doesn't use the powder, he only distributes it. The ones who sell it are the human bandits working with him, and the buyers are the useless low-ranked hunters. Ivan says demons don't use the drug, since they know how to work together as a group. He says he only took this job to give low-ranked trash a chance to be strong at least once. And after they die, he uses them as material, since drug users make good material. Judging by Ivan's mana waves, the protagonist knows he's telling the truth. Min-Soo says Ivan should be ashamed of fighting using those rotting flesh puppets. The half-demon says he's getting irritated, but no matter what they do, he'll keep reviving the ghouls infinitely. Things seem pretty bad for the hunters, but the protagonist stays calm, handling everything with composure, which seems to irritate the half-demon even more. The protagonist says that half-demons like Ivan use dark mana, and asks if he's right. Ivan seems shocked by what the protagonist said. Min-Soo says he knows the white-haired man is a half-demon, that cursed species rejected by both demons and humans. The protagonist says Ivan uses dark mana so openly. It's obvious to anyone that he's a hybrid. Now the half-demon was truly angry and exuding dark mana. Frey warns that demonic power is dangerous, but Min says Ivan's attacks have become more predictable. He says now he's going all out, and Frey asks if he's going to overdo it again. Basically, he's just going to use the technique with more intensity. Using the taming technique, he takes control of Ivan's ghouls. Now the rest of the investigation team will have an easier time winning their battles. The bandits realize they lost their numerical advantage. The protagonist uses the ghouls against the bandits themselves. Alone against the ghouls, the bandit duo ends up devoured. Ivan can't even believe the protagonist controlled the ghouls with magic. He was so impressive that he didn't know whether to laugh or be annoyed. What he really wanted was to find out what the protagonist actually was. Ivan seriously asks if the protagonist is human. Min-Soo says yes, he was just more proficient than normal humans. He sends the ghouls charging at Ivan. the half-demon repels them with magic. He says that now that things have escalated to this level, he won't hold back. Just when he thinks he's gained a safe distance, the protagonist is already behind him in midair. The protagonist launches a lightning and energy-imbued attack at Ivan, and when the dust settles, we see that Crow protected Ivan with a barrier. Min Soo says he thought she wouldn't interfere, but apparently she can't let her partners die. She says Ivan still has some use, but once he's no longer useful, the protagonist can do whatever he wants with him. Crow claims she doesn't want to fight, and the protagonist considers the problems that letting Ivan escape could cause in the future. He knows he could eliminate both if he wanted, but at that moment, taking care of the wounded group is the priority. Considering that the girl is stronger than the necromancer, dealing with her would clearly take time he doesn't have. The protagonist asks the girl who the current leader of the hybrids is, the one orchestrating that dirty business. She says that although the protagonist knows a lot about them, things have changed nowadays. The drug operation is entirely Ivan's doing, using the name of the half-demons to take on the order. Naturally, she doesn't even know who the client is. Min Soo says it's ridiculous for her to interfere in Ivan's personal matter if she doesn't even know who's behind it. She rushes to explain that she's not involved. She intervened because it's her duty to keep Ivan alive. Everything he's been doing, she only found out about recently. She understands the protagonist has questions, but she doesn't know much. He looks at the group, who seem to be in pretty bad shape. Knowing he needs to be quick, he says that this time he'll let them walk away alive, but there won't be a second time. She asks if he really believes her, and Min briefly explains that by reading her mana, he could tell she was telling the truth. Then he asks one final question. Who exactly is this we she referred to? The answer was almost obvious. The Hybrid Association operates under the name of the IZ Trade Guild. Now it's clear that the half-demons are not directly involved. He knows that if it were a profit scheme, they wouldn't have chosen hybrids who are naturally hostile toward humans. He already knew the drug had a disturbing energy, something he'd never seen even in high-rank gates. Now he knows that the IZ Guild is run by hybrids, and he needs to investigate them personally. Layla thanks everyone for rescuing her and tells them to leave quickly. They've stayed in the gate too long already. The protagonist thinks to himself that they still need to clear the gate before they leave. Ikari asks about the necromancer, and Min Soo says he called for reinforcements and managed to escape. Layla apologizes for letting her guard down. Kumo says getting out alive is good enough. It's because of complications like these that he prefers to work alone, or partially alone, since he has Free. He tries to talk to Free, but there's no response. 2 days later, he's back at the HNCS headquarters, reporting the situation to Edward. Blackwood says he's never heard of necromancers, and that they still don't know who the mastermind behind the drug is. He apologizes to the protagonist, saying he thought it was just a field inspection and ended up being too complacent. The protagonist says it was a completely unpredictable situation, but what matters is that everyone's safe. Edward acknowledges that and says it's thanks to the protagonist that everyone was able to return to work right away. He also compliments the protagonist's skills, which are still excellent. The protagonist cuts the conversation short and says he's heading back to Korea. Edward asks him to at least say goodbye to the rest of the team. Min Soo runs into Vikari while walking. She thanks him for healing her and says that next time they meet, she'll repay the favor. Since that day against the necromancer, Free hasn't responded. Even so, the abilities he gained through Free's skill still function normally. He wonders when his mysterious companion of unknown origin will start responding to him again. According to the results of the investigation, those responsible for the incident at the gate are an organization called ALMACHT. They weren't the producers of the drug, but they were the suppliers, and with their leader dead, the sale of the drug has been halted. Edward asks about the status of the gate. The gate ended up severely damaged due to the battles that took place. Useless now, it will be closed soon, but with the ambiguous situation, the former president's faction might blame them. Blackwood tells her to drop the subject, but she insists on pointing out that the former president's faction controls headquarters. Among them, the most powerful subordinate is Karjal Wan, a semi-special grade hunter. It will be a challenge for the case. They need to make sure the former president's faction has nothing to latch onto. And the one who walks in without knocking is none other than Karjal. He says he heard the vice president has been busy with the case of the illegal enhancement drugs. Blackwood asks what he's getting at, and Karjal tells him not to play innocent. In the end, the team returned without anything significant and only left the place damaged. Edward explains that the investigators were ambushed but managed to deal with the attackers. Even so, the only result was a small organization not linked to the drug manufacturer. At this rate, the investigation will fall way behind. Karjal proposes the following: make the investigation public. If this goes public, lots of people who don't even know about the drug will want to try it, which will result in an explosive increase in victims. Karjal says that to avoid that, all he has to do is find and eliminate the source of the drug supply. If things continue at this slow pace, those interested in this type of product will eventually find and buy it. Before making a decision, they need to hear from other semi-special grade hunters. He wonders who they'll choose to listen to. Edward calls the protagonist to inform him that the investigation may soon become public, so they don't have time, and the case goes deeper than they imagine. Edward says he looked into Pandemonium and the IZ Guild. The most important part was about the gate investigation. Another team was sent for a large-scale investigation, but nothing was found. Apparently, the gate wasn't ranked as highly as initially estimated, and after all considerations, the most likely explanation is that the gate had already been cleared by the guys who attacked them, since there's no way those guys could have guessed the gate would be empty and use it as a distribution hub. Unless that gate wasn't a real gate at all, it would be possible if it was just a dimensional magic disguised as a gate, to be used as the perfect distribution point. Edward says something like that is impossible. Even so, the protagonist has investigative authority and needs to keep helping however he can. He barely hangs up the phone and is already being bothered. The old man says not to disturb the master, but Min Soo himself says it won't be a bother. He says maybe after some stretching Frey will wake up. The scene shifts to people walking around the nighttime city. Then a tattooed guy who looks like a generic villain approaches a shady-looking place. He tells the guards to get out of the way. After he says the secret code, the guards let him in. A shady guy wearing sunglasses indoors at night greets the tattooed man. The tattooed man greets him back. He says that lately the illegal drug investigation network has intensified, so if that's the case, he'll provide a guard to escort him. The guy in sunglasses snaps his fingers and another shady figure drops down from the ceiling. That's exactly what the tattooed guy needed. The police are on his tail, and the uncertainty of when he might get caught is driving him crazy. As if the place were a factory of shady people, another one shows up, this time a weirdo in a mask. The tattooed guy says to the clown that he was right on time, as always. He even apologizes to the masked man for making him distribute such a large quantity. The masked man says there's no problem. It's just a matter of selling here and there, and he'll get rid of it quickly. He checks the suitcases to see if the powder is good stuff, and after checking, says it's spectacular. The protagonist is calmly working, until people start talking about him. They talk about a rumor that he was summoned to the main headquarters, and the vice president came all the way to see him. The whispers continue, speculating that maybe he got there through connections or just pure luck. The gossipers leave, but Juan arrives to ask if the protagonist saw the official document that was just released. If it's the one that announces the investigation into the illegal drugs, then yes, he saw it. It has finally been made a public investigation. Then he asks if the protagonist went to the main headquarters specifically to investigate. The protagonist says it was a secret, so he kept it a secret. Simple as that. It's not that simple. He's just a regular employee but has access to information even the branch director doesn't. The problem is that the team leaders already know. They're interrupted when they're called into the director's office. Getting straight to the point, the director says that, as they're well aware, the main headquarters has sent official cooperation requests to all countries. An illegal enhancement drug is circulating in the black market, and Mint must have confirmed the details during his business trip. The director asks what happened during that trip. Because of this, the main headquarters is expecting major results specifically from that branch. He, somewhat panicked, says they're being targeted directly and are already being pressured for results. Few countries are as clean from illegal drugs as Korea, so there's nowhere to pull results from in such a small country. But the worst part is that the contact came from someone in the former president's faction. The protagonist asks if that means they're going to give up, but the director says absolutely not. They, the Korean branch, must show their maximum performance in the investigation. From that moment on, Wang's team will be the one dedicated to investigating the illegal drug. The director asks if he understands now. If the team doesn't deliver results this time, the entire branch will be stained. Although other teams will also investigate, the main suspects and key locations will be handed to the Gangbuk team. Wang says the other teams will object. The director bluntly says Wang never cared about that and tells the protagonist he's authorized to go on business trips at any time. But until the main headquarters calls him, Min Soo is to cooperate with the domestic investigation, and finally he presents their team's first case so they can begin as soon as possible. The director had all teams compile recent suspicious cases. To summarize, suspicious activity has been observed in a large abandoned warehouse located in Manhwa. That warehouse had already been a drug point for some time, but unfamiliar faces have been spotted there frequently. It seems that people from other regions are going there to buy, and fights between awakened individuals are happening often. Wang says this is too much for his team, but the director was prepared for that and already requested cooperation from a private guild. They already knew something about the case, so it wasn't hard to get headquarters approval. They just need to focus on results. So now at the abandoned warehouse, the protagonist is waiting for the guild people. The protagonist asks why they didn't send subordinates. Guild leaders should be busy. They say they are busy but still came to help, and even ask where the other members of his team are. The others stayed outside to prevent anyone from escaping. Manhwa says that makes sense, since about half the people there are civilians just looking for common awakening drug. The fights the awakened criminals supposedly started might just be between dealers or guards. It's a good opportunity to round up and arrest all the addicts at once. They discuss whether to go through the front door or sneak in. Manhwa says infiltration takes too long, so they should just go in hard and fast. The protagonist tells the two of them to be quiet. They overhear a conversation where someone says they came there because they heard there was an amazing product, but it was just more of the same. The awakened ones go around showing off their powers but keep manufacturing exclusive drugs. One of them tells the other to have some ethics in business. He's been in the game for over 15 years. Then he asks if his buddy knew that Jean Quan was heading to Korea. The hunters reveal themselves and ask who Jean Quan is. The guys say that addicts should go through the front door, but Min Soo coldly says he's not interested in the drugs, and he ordered the traffickers to open the door for him. They beat up the traffickers and go in through the door. The protagonist asks if they're just going to go in beating everyone or not. Saijun tells everyone to come closer. Then he pulls out a pen that transforms into a staff and uses a concealment skill. Manhwa says that Saijun lives up to the title of Great Mage. He explains that elemental magic can be used in countless ways depending on proficiency and application. The invisibility he used is basically light refraction to hide someone. The protagonist says, a bit sadly, that Free would love to eat that skill. Saijun asks if Free stopped parasitizing him, but Min Soo says it's nothing important. Then he tells his brother that he's really grown. Saijun gets embarrassed, but Manhwa wants to hear that she did a good job too. He just tells them to cut it out so they can go home. Inside the place, the substances are being used casually, with addicts lying around everywhere. Manhwa says most of them are just regular people. Sijin says there's definitely a separate market for the awakened, and maybe they can find some clues by listening to conversations. Manhwa points out that the place is bigger than they expected, and just arresting this many criminals would already be a big achievement. Sijin says it's not worth wasting time on them since they can just pay bail, and the organization controlling the drug supply would be replaced by another group just days later. An addict comes running and screaming. The dealers think the kid must be hallucinating. From what they've heard, everyone who goes into the basement comes out panicked like that. The protagonist tells them to keep watch while he checks it out. Sijin wanted to go with him, but the protagonist told him to stay where he was. Min Soo walks through an underground sewer that seems to be some kind of escape route. He can sense an unfamiliar energy there. As he walks through it, a strange being watches him. The sensation was different from mana. It was like the energy he felt coming from the spirit summoned by Hikari. He deduces that it might be a beast-type spirit, while an obsessor follows closely behind him. The creature wasn't affected by the lightning attack. Apparently, it can't be hit with mana. It's probably a ghost. A little girl says not to hit the ghost. The protagonist is surprised that the child can see it. He asks who she is, but the girl says she was about to ask him the same thing. She tells him to leave because that place is her home. Min Soo argues with the child, asking how a sewer could be her home, and the girl says that anywhere she can rest is her home. That wasn't the most important question. What mattered was where her parents were and why she was injured. She says her parents left her there. In other words, she was traded for a bit of substance, and she got hurt when she left through another path to look for food. The protagonist asks if she lives in that filthy place with ghosts as her friends. He uses a healing ability on her. The girl is amazed by his power, saying it's warm, unlike her own power, which is cold. Min Soo asks if she's the one making the ghosts visible, and she confirms it. He asks her name. She says it's Cheyenne. The protagonist says he's going to need her ghost friends to help him find the bad guys. She agrees to help.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.